could address when you get the petition paperwork from National Grid. As engineers, when we go out there, we try to best determine, okay, this is where the pole needs to be, without, obviously keeping in mind, people's homes and traffic and things of that nature. We're not necessarily always going to think, oh, this section of the road's going to be, they're going to have a sidewalk here next year, that type of thing. But if you know that, when you get the paperwork in, you could certainly, get back in touch with our clerk and relay that information. So then maybe the engineer can reassess. Otherwise, we wouldn't really know.
Okay, so Mark, is internally for us, is that paperwork that comes across your desk?
Yeah, that's normally paperwork that would come across Melanie's desk, yes.
Okay, so I think that would be, then internally, we just have to make sure that we dot that I and cross that T. Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, I will now defer to Mr. Stivers.
All right, Mr. Stivers.
I wish I could remember what I did last time. I'll move that we approve the request as presented, subject to the condition that the location be, to the extent feasibly possible, located where it would not interfere with future sidewalk construction.
And I will
Do we have a
second
second?
that.
Thank you, Marty. Roll call, Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Haley,
Aye.
Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Brascio. Aye. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. I don't want to say your name wrong. Mr. Gavin? Galvin. Mr. Galvin, thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item, Superintendent Martineau, review and approve draft charge for Neary School Building Committee. If we could please bring over Mr. Martineau, Mr. Challen, I'm not sure if Mr. Malinowski is being brought over for this one. If we could bring him over as well.
And Ms. Brascio,
ahead.
I'm gonna recuse myself from this conversation, given my husband's interest in being on the committee.
Okay, we'll have Mark text you when to come back, Chelsea. Thank you. Good evening, Greg and Roger. Thank you. Greg, is Jason supposed to come over for this conversation as well, or is it just you and Roger?
I think, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Jason was going to stay in the audience, but be promoted if there were any questions specific to the school research committee.
Yeah, I agree with the superintendent. I'm not sure he's got a speaking role,
Okay.
but he's never been shy if called upon, so.
All right, great. Thank you. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't leaving anybody out. So good evening, Superintendent Martineau. How are you tonight?
Good, thank you for having me. And,
Welcome.
So
This is your, what, is this your fourth, fifth, or sixth meeting today, Greg?
I'm not counting.
Okay.
It's probably the best meeting that I've had all day. So
So Superintendent, if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment and talking about, how we got to this point a little bit and the position that was taken on the 9th, and then kind of go into the charge, that would be great for anybody that may not have seen the meeting on the 9th.
Sure. So at the Wednesday, February 9th, school committee meeting, the Town Capital Planning School Research Subcommittee presented its recommendation to the school committee. And the school research subcommittee's conclusion was that Southborough Public Schools can be consolidated from 3 to 4 schools if the appropriate infrastructure is put into place for Neary School.
I think that's 4 to 3, right?
Yeah, 4 to 3. Thank you. Thank you, Roger. Among the recommended next steps was for the committee to establish a school building committee to conduct a feasibility study into the options for renovations or new construction at the existing Neary School site. So I'd also like to note, as the select board members are aware, that in June of 2021, the district filed a statement of interest for Neary School to enter into the Massachusetts School Building Authority's core building program. And we do anticipate that the district will learn whether or not MSBA will invite the district into its eligibility period at the MSBA's executive board meeting scheduled for March 3rd, which is rapidly approaching. It is important to note that MSBA process is very prescriptive in that one of the first steps, if invited in and if accepted, is to establish a school building committee. At the last week's school committee, the committee voted a charge to establish a Neary school building committee. And basically the charge mirrored the MSBA school building committee's voting requirements and membership in preparation that the SOI is accepted and the district is invited into the eligibility phase. And the Neary School Building Committee would be an ad hoc committee. And really the establishment of a school building committee is under the purview of the select board, and all members would be appointed by the board. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. We'll start with Mr. Healy. Sorry, Marty, you're muted.
You're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. Again, it seems pretty straightforward. The only question I would have, is there any, I don't know, maybe I haven't seen, it was included and I haven't picked up on it, but whatever was sent to the MSBA, is that more limited than the scope of what's included in this charge?
The charge mirrors what MSBA would require, so it parallels the process. So we would be in good standing if we were invited into eligibility period and it was decided that it was a good option for the community. The charge would be a parallel charge.
But in terms of my read of this is in terms of the feasibility, it's to look at a whole range of options.
Correct.
And I just want to make sure that MSBA isn't limited to a single option. It's not, okay.
No,
you're shaking your head is that that's not the case, and so it would not be, the feasibility study would be able to be as broad ranging as if MSBA was not involved.
That is accurate.
Okay, that's my only question. Thanks very much.
I'm muted now. Sorry, Mr. Stivers.
Thank you. Welcome, Superintendent and Mr. Challen. As you folks know, I've been following the school committee and the capital planning school research subcommittee work, so I think I'm pretty much up to speed on this, and I think it all looks like it's in good shape, and I have no problem with the charge. Looks like the right direction. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stivers. Mr. Dennington.
Thank you. I don't have any questions right now.
I don't either. So Mark, let's talk process for a minute. So if we approve this charge tonight, we can start advertising for the at-large seats immediately. And then the school committee, Board of Selectmen advisory and capital committee can, at their next scheduled meeting, can actually appoint or vote. I shouldn't say appoint, recommend. Sorry.
Correct. So we can reach out to those boards and committees, have them provide the names of the representatives that they're offering to you for appointment. We can advertise for the at-large and hopefully then conduct any interviews and do appointments at our March 1st meeting.
Okay, so if any members of our board have an interest, I know I do, in serving on this, just let Mr. Purple know in advance of our March 1st meeting, and then we'll make sure it gets discussed and whomever gets seated at that time. Sorry, I'm bumbling here. So that being said, Mr. Stivers, do we have a motion?
I'll move that we approve the charge as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Is there thank you. Roll call. Mr. Healy.
Aye.
Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
And Ms. Braccio. Aye. Well, that was quick and easy. Thank you guys both for coming tonight. Much appreciated.
Thank you, and have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Good luck to all of us with the MSBA.
Yeah, fingers crossed, right, Sam?
Good evening.
All right. Mark, can you please text Chelsea to come back?
You know, while we're waiting for her,
Yes.
I think it might make sense to ask town council. I'm pretty sure that particularly because it's an open meeting, that Ms. Malinowski does not have to exit stage left when she's recusing. She just can't participate in the discussion or in the vote. Anyway, I just, it's belt and suspenders, and it's fine that we traditionally have done that, but it's one of these things where someday it's not going to happen, and it's going to look like we did something wrong. Again, if we could get an opinion from Mr. Tallerman that maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that you just have to recuse, and that means you can't participate or vote. But again, it's a public meeting. You can stay in our little Zoom frame while the discussion's going on.
All right. Well, you know what? I'll ask him at 1 second, Sam. I'll ask him at office hours tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. But they do require people to leave the room during in-person public hearings for those kind of circumstances.
I don't think they do. I think, again, folks have adopted it that way, but I really don't think it's required.
Yeah, it's certainly been practiced historically, but it'd be good to clarify.
Yep. Either myself or I'm sure Mr. Stivers will be at office hours tomorrow. One of us will make sure that we cover that base.
Wouldn't miss it.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Next up is the quarterly financial report. Can we bring Ms. McCullough and Mr. Ballantyne over? And then Ms. Malinowski. I just want to make, while we're bringing them over, one disclosure that under general expenses discussion, I will be recusing. There we go, Marty. I'm going to bop out as well until we get clarity based on the discussion of the snow budget as my husband plows for the town. So I'll ask at that time, if anybody has any questions regarding the snow budget, if we could consolidate it to that point, then I can come back in and participate in the balance of the discussion. So Chelsea, I'll hand it over to you. Also, when I leave, you will be chairing until I come back as well. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Brian and Carla. Thanks for coming. The team walked through the process once again for the quarterly report, and Brian prepped the revenue side, Carla prepped the expense side and the revolving accounts. And one thing that we did take into consideration through this quarter is taking a look at what's budgeted for FY23 to see if there was anything that popped up that we saw was trending higher compared to budget for FY22, and if any adjustments needed to be made for FY23 if they hadn't already. So I'll hand, who's going to go first? Brian, you're going to do revenues first?
Sure.
Okay, so I'll let Brian give high level revenue, but everything was in the summary as usual. So.
Thanks, Chelsea. So good evening. The revenues, I'll move pretty quick through this. It's fairly similar to the first quarter as far as where we're kind of trending for the first two quarters. Same sort of highlights that I gave probably 3 months ago, and that's the bigger items, including excise, which is still about almost $100,000 more year over year, which is good. Sneak preview to the next quarter, we did get the large. In fact, most of the folks here probably got their bills for their excise tax cars recently. That's our major commitment, and just not to go too far off track, but it was actually a little up from last year. So I think it was about $70,000 up. So that's a really good sign. We will have another billing to talk about before the next meeting about this. So a little more time, but that's a good early signal that's holding. So just a few other things real quick. The building fees still strong. Again, I know I said this last quarter because of the timing differences. We'll see if that holds for the whole year, since there was a few large permits towards the end of the year last year. The ambulance fund, even though it's a dedicated fund, is really bounced back. I actually changed the estimate for this year by $20,000 because it seems fairly, we're going to hit that goal unless something major happens. So felt good about that. The couple of small areas that we had that not a lot of money, but they're just not great, is again, investment income, even though the interest rates are going up soon, probably, not fast enough to help this year. And some of our delinquent tax fees that are a little flatter than last year. But I'm hoping to, get a plan together to address the accounts that are out there for that right now. And local aid went up. We got a whopping $13,000 net out of that. Better than losing money though. And so every penny counts. So I've adjusted that in the budget. That's great. The water fund, it's not so great. I'm not panicking, but it is a little flat from last year. I just gave some data to the consultant who's updating our study. So I anticipate next, well, you may separately hear this before the next report, actually. I think they're compiling the report now, and there'll be more information on that in the next, hopefully I'm thinking in the next month at the most. So stay tuned for that. There'll be more information on that. And so just to wrap it up, I know I went through pretty quick, but like I said, it's pretty similar to the first quarter. And I always say the quarters get more important as they go along. So this is a good quarter to look at, but the third and fourth will really be much, much more important. So keeping an eye on it.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions on the revenue side? That's it.
Two things. Brian, any idea what's going on with the ambulance fund? I know the chief has been working to improve the claim reimbursement process there. Is that a result of what he's been doing, or simply is the volume up to do that?
I think it's both. And I think that the volume's definitely bounced back because that was a very unsettled past year. And I'm seeing a little more consistency in the deposits. So I think it's both, Sam.
Okay. And on the water thing, I don't know if you saw, I sent along to Karen recently the MWRA assessment projections for FY23, and our assessment is down over $200,000 there. So is that not going to help us substantially in that world?
Yeah.
It should, and that's good timing. That it's also going to be passed on to our data guy. And I haven't got a chance to talk to Karen about that yet, but you're right. I think it was about maybe even been a little over 300,000. She's redoing her water budget. I know that. So
248 was the assessment decline, actually. Projection.
Okay. I thought it was a little higher than that, but yeah, I knew it was right around there. So that is good news. Good. Yes.
And I'm delighted to hear that auto excise taxes are going up with my new car. So I'm happy to
keep buying new.
My new 8-year-old car. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carla, do you want to do the expenses?
Sure. I included all the detail for the expenses in the packet. So there's plenty of description. Just a few highlights. We're actually keeping an eye on IT spending because the report looks a little funky. But Jay and I are working closely together, and a lot of his expenses have been paid in the beginning of the fiscal year. So despite what the report looks like, I believe he's in good shape. For the reserve fund transfers, we've only had one this year. And we're going to be eyeing, police, fire. We do expect a small one for IT for the Board of Health copier. And this isn't in the memo, but I did speak with Jim Hagerty today about early election and, town meeting expenses. He does expect there to be extra expenses that his budget will not cover. So really we'll know more as things shape up through Q3, but we are keeping a close eye, and the department heads are doing a good job keeping in communication with me. The fire chief has alerted us that there might be, due to the assessment center for the promotion for the lieutenant coming up, he may need a reserve fund transfer. We had good news from the school that the Algonquin assessment was reduced $70,500 due to a regional transportation credit. And that is an adjustment that we will be able to recognize this fiscal year. So that's a big one in our favor. For DPW, we are tracking, spending and snow and ice, and actually for that big historic storm blizzard that we had, the labor costs were $52,800. We are still in good shape despite that, because we really haven't had a ton of snow beyond that. And we're looking at gas. Gas has increased. So again, Karen hopes to be able to absorb anything within her budget, but again, we're working closely with her to hash that out as things come up. And the water budget, this report shows the reduction of the $150,000 in the overall budget that was voted at special town meeting. And there is a memo in there for the gas hydrant maintenance repair was over $5,900. And she's just letting you know that's a true cost. We're going to leave that cost there. And hopefully she'll have no more hydrant repairs, but water reserve should be able to cover that overage if need be. And should I go on to revolving funds, or you want to ask questions first, Chelsea?
Does anybody have any questions on the expense side for the operating budget? Okay, you can go to revolving. Thank you.
Okay, so revolving, I included, as we had in the prior quarter, the chart showing all the revolvings, what's been expended in contrast to what was voted for the limit. And the only fund I'm concerned about is the recreation fund. I'm working with Tim. His expenses are, more than 50% of what their limit is. But again, some of their stuff that is timing with that department. So, but we're looking at maybe proposing an increase with the rec board. Will have a memo to you guys if they feel they need an increase for that revolving fund. And the immunization clinic, we've got a very low balance in that now, and we are getting reimbursements, but it's very slow. So it's just COVID, it's backlog, it's it's at a slow pace, but it's coming along. So we're keeping an eye on that as well.
Thank you. And I texted Lisa to come back. So Lisa, did you have any questions on the expenses? We moved on to revolving accounts.
Okay, yes, actually, I had a couple questions.
Okay.
Similar to what I asked Brian and Carla last time. My goal in asking them is making sure, especially getting this close to, setting the new budget for 23, that if we're finding potential shortfalls in 22, that we can maybe address them as need be. So my first question was on the library.
Okay.
That overall their expenses, 610, sorry, is the number. Overall their expenses were at about 65%. And I just want to make sure that with some of the tracking you're doing, that we don't maybe need to take a look at fiscal year 23. I know some of the things were specifically employee training, which is always a good thing. But I mean, are you finding, Carla, that you think that it'll come back in line, or do you think this may be an issue as we move forward?
I think it will come back in line. That employee training cost was actually a degree payment. Someone had been awarded or earned their master's degree, and that stipend comes out of, well, it's not really a stipend, but it comes out of the employee training line of the department. So that's why that was kind of skewed. Ryan wasn't aware that she was going to be completing her degree this year. So I do think we're in good shape with that.
So do you think, is that a stipend or whatever you want to call it? Is it a one-time payment, or is it something that it is? Okay.
Yeah, it's a one-time payment. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Next one, just quickly, was Youth Commission. Their print mail communications, they're 109%, so they're 9% over. Is that a trend that we need to be concerned with going into the rest of the year and potentially?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I've spoken with Sarah and she seems to feel that she will be in good shape at the end of the year.
Okay, so you don't anticipate an issue going into 23.
No.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Civil defense. This one should be kind of an easy one. There's not a whole lot in there, other than they're at 77% in their expense side. I don't know, it's miscellaneous contracted services. It looks skewed that. Is that also potentially a problem?
No, they paid a contracted services contract in the beginning of the year up front. So
Okay,
they kind of
perfect.
fronted their expenses. Yeah.
Okay, almost done. Fire department, 270. Last line item, replacement equipment, it's at 84%. Is that something that's more front-ended, or is that something unexpected that came up?
That actually was the line that the boat came from.
Okay,
So
got it.
we had
Okay.
put the money for the boat in there. So yeah,
Okay,
that's definitely skews it a little, but like I said, he's hoping to be able to absorb the cost within his budget and not have a reserve fund transfer. The only thing is Lieutenant Promotion Assessment Center, but again, we're working with him and keeping an eye on things.
okay. Town clerk, other office supplies, he's at 62% with a busy next few months coming up for him. And you may have addressed that with the potential reserve fund transfer that you already spoke of.
Yes, I'm not sure where he stands as far as what else he needs to buy for the year. But again, like I said, I spoke with him. I actually called him today on it because I said, oh geez, I didn't include it in the memo, but he will potentially need something, but I'm not sure what line is going to be overdrawn.
Okay, and I think I have just two more potentially. This one's for Brian, actually. It's for the clerk's treasurer collector's office. So Brian, same thing under your expenses. There's three that are over 50%, the employee training, the other office supplies, and the bonds. Is that something we need to look at, or is that front-ended, or?
It's exactly it. It's mostly front-ended. Yes.
Okay, that's it. And then I think that's it for you, Brian. I have two more. I was wrong because I have one for Mr. Purple on the selectmen's. No, that one's actually fine. I have, last one is for the Board of Selectmen, and looking at the advertising professional tech, it's at 85%. The office equipment repair maintenance is at 96%, and the miscellaneous contracted services at 90%. Again, are those potentially front-ended things, or? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so.
Not the contracted services though, because I think that's where the minutes come out of.
Yes, you're correct. The contracted services, and I think that Ms. McAuliffe already indicated that we're going to have an issue there.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that something we'll address going into 23? Or
Yes.
has it been?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all the questions I have on the expenses. I'll remember some of these things, so I won't ask you next quarter. I'll make a note, but that's it for me. And again, thank you, great job.
Lisa,
Yes, Sam.
I have a question about the CARES Act report that was in the packet. Is this the time to talk about that, or is that some other item on the agenda?
So I think we were gonna go to the CARES after this, Sam.
Okay, fine. I'll
Yep.
hold on that then. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Chelsea, back to you.
I think that is it. I mean, all the detail for everything that Carla talked about and that Brian talked about is in there. And I think that was it for the summary. So I think I'm good unless there's any other questions.
Do you want to lead into the ARPA?
I think
Yes,
Andrew.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah,
Andrew,
before
go
we go there, and I'm sorry, this is going back a little bit to receipts, revenue. Are we tracking the meals tax revenue? And I didn't see a mention of that there. And
Oh, we haven't.
So that wouldn't be in this quarter because it didn't start until 1/1 of 22, and this is only
Okay.
through 12/31. So that will be included, should be included in the Q3 report.
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
but we're set up and ready to go. We're just waiting for it to come in. And that will be in a separate line. Actually, we'll track it separately. Yeah, great question.
All right, so Carla, I guess I'll turn over to the next part for you. You were given us a great document, as you usually do. There's an update to ARPA, not ARPA, CARES and FEMA. So if you want to touch base on that, and obviously Mr. Stivers already has questions for you.
Sure, no problem. My favorite topic, CARES and FEMA. You can't talk about one without the other. So basically with the memo that I put together, I tried to show all the federal programs that were on the town side, how everything kind of shook out. There were some late guidance changes at the end of the CARES period. The CARES has closed. It was closed on December 31st after being extended for a year. And FEMA now is ongoing. Like FEMA had a 12/31 date as well to be done, but given how things are going with the pandemic, it is ongoing, the vaccine as well. So I just kind of tried to summarize, where we are with the filings, where we are with applications, and, how things were distributed. We've in total had 939,000 of COVID charges since the beginning of the pandemic, and that's spread across those 4 programs. What I didn't put in here, and as I was thinking about it, the school also had federal programs that in total were $727,000. So the school as well has bought and purchased things through their grants as well with regard to federal funding. That's not usually something I report on, but I thought it might be important to bring that up. So, but I'm happy to take questions, or if anybody has any details, any follow-up details they need, happy to talk about it.
Great. Thanks, Carla. Mr. Stivers, go ahead, Chelsea.
Sorry, do you mind if I just add a little bit to what Carla just described? Yeah. So there's been a lot of rule changes between CARES and FEMA and what could apply, and going back in time and reclassing expenses. And, the way FEMA works is that they audit on the front end and CARES audits on the back end. So I know Carla put a lot of work into trying to figure out which expenses should go in which bucket and what the least amount of risk was for the town. So a lot of towns did not switch between CARES and FEMA. So I just want to point that out, that Carla went through that exercise to try to mitigate and make sure that we would know sooner rather than later if things were not going to get reimbursed by FEMA in this case, because they audit up front. So, I think if you look back a couple of months ago, there were more expenses in the CARES bucket that have now been moved over to FEMA. And I think it was the right decision to ensure that we weren't going to be sitting here in 3 years saying, CARES is now taking their money back because they don't agree that expense was valid for this. So I just wanted to add that color.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Mr. Stivers.
Thanks. And my question, I guess, is related in some ways to Chelsea's comment here, but I actually saw a Mass Department of Revenue report that I think was a final summary of the CARES program. And it showed that Southborough had a total eligible amount of almost $897,000 for CARES. I'm not sure how that was determined, but the report showed that we've received a total payment so far, 26% of that amount, or about $269,000, which suggests that there's a lot of headroom in there in terms of like $625,000 that we didn't choose to file for. And if you look at what other towns have done in terms of the percentage of their total eligible amount, there were 91 towns that used 90% or more of that. We used 26% of ours, and we're in the bottom 20% of that that ranking of towns utilizing CARES funding. So I guess I'm curious, sounds like we're certainly very conservative. On the other hand, it sounds like most of the rest of the world is not at all conservative relative to what we did. So, I mean, I guess it's hindsight now, but it sure sounds to me like there's a lot of money left on the table there that other towns are moving very aggressively to get, and we didn't. I'd be interested in understanding sort of how we wound up there, and why, if we still believe that what we did was the right choice to avoid some sort of a clawback 3 years down the road or whatever. There's certainly going to be a big crowd of people, I would guess, that may be in that bind if that's a real risk. And is there programs and expenses that everybody else was filing for reimbursement for that we weren't somehow? I guess I'm interested in not leaving anything on the table, but certainly we want to follow the rules. On the other hand, we're sort of out of step, it appears to me, from if you look at the rest of the world. So any thoughts on why we wound up where we did?
Sure. So yes, that's a fair question. We had a lot of money, but we were allocated that money. It wasn't entitled to us. The whole thing about CARES was it had to be unbudgeted. That was the big piece. It had to be COVID related. It had to be, we had to receive it by the deadline. And I came in kind of the middle of it. Well, so we thought it was the end, but it was beginning July 2020. And basically, FEMA was very strict up front. So we had more money in our CARES that we were looking to draw down, but FEMA has no limit. So we can submit to FEMA our true expenses. We're not butting up against the limit with FEMA. And FEMA is a more labor intensive filing process as far as what they require and the back and forth with them, and you kind of hash out where things are located and pictures, and they're very, very detailed. But once you get the money, they're not going to come take it back. With CARES, they really have not said when their time frame is for auditing. And I know I labored over this, Sam. I reworked the numbers several times, like Mark and Brian were, I'm sure, tired of me pulling my hair out. But I mean, we just chose, FEMA, we reserved $350 for testing for the school, and the testing ended up being covered in FEMA later. I mean, if we had had more expenses up front before FEMA had opened up, then we would have put them through CARES, and that's how it would have gone. But the way things shook out in the shifting sands and the guidance changes, and people I spoke with, as well as people at the state, I was on a first name basis with the be all end all there. I proposed many projects to him, many expenses to him, and it was either yes or no. And once I received that, I didn't feel comfortable going forward with those expenses. Yeah. But we did try to spend these funds. I wish it shook out differently, but I feel good because I know for FEMA, we have been putting everything we can, and we're still tracking that. We're working with the school to, provide for their FEMA as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, all that makes sense, Carla, certainly, but I remain curious to know why there are other towns that are spending literally millions of dollars out of CARES, and apparently they believe that it's going to be approved or it has been approved by this same auditor. I mean, just out of curiosity, I'd be interested in calling around some of these towns. I mean, Chelsea spent like $6 million out of there, understanding better, do they have different expense needs than we did for some reason? Or are there other things that we should have considered there somehow? Not that it's going to change the future for us at this point, but I remain curious to understand it.
Right. Well, every town had its own theory, its own methodology to this. We were building the plane while we were flying and flying fast.
As everyone was doing, yeah.
Yeah. Mark, did
Yes, I was just going to go to Mark before I go. I think Chelsea wanted to say something as well.
No, I just had two quick comments. One of the things that I think needs to be kept in mind was a lot of these communities, and Carla can provide the backup to hopefully substantiate the comment, but I think a lot of communities, when the money became available, they began spending that money, on testing. And before, a lot of those expenses shifted from CARES to FEMA. So a lot of communities went through their CARES money simply on testing. and getting testing kits and a lot of those, type of issues. Those expenses eventually ended up becoming FEMA issues, which allowed those communities that hadn't spent that to have CARES money available to do other things. So a lot of communities, Mr. Stivers, that you're seeing that spent all their money, a lot of that was upfront money testing early on when that money became available. The second thing is to the point of, the shifting sands. What was an eligible CARES expense, is now no longer an eligible CARES expense. It's now a FEMA expense. And so I think to look at the DOR, the DLS report on the CARES expense is only really kind of getting half the story. As Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story comes when you look at the FEMA, and Ms. McAuliffe mentioned about the school programs today. Superintendent Martineau had reached out early and said, look, we're looking to do a testing process for the students. It's going to be, about $800,000. Southborough share will be $350,000. Can we commit $350,000 of CARES for the testing of the students? We said, absolutely. We made the commitment. We figured, Ms. McAuliffe was all excited. She goes, we're spending some of the CARES money. We're doing all of these good things with the money. And then the school had the expenses covered by the state in another way. So it wasn't an intention not to spend. It was just that, some of where the money went didn't all happen up out of CARES because there are other buckets. So I think if you're going to look at it, and you need to look at it in total with all the buckets and not just isolate the comments to one bucket.
And that's exactly my question, is I'm interested in the rest of the story from some of these other towns to just restore my confidence that we actually did the right thing. Not again that we have a chance for a do-over here, but I'd like to know.
Yeah, I have no question that we did the right thing, because at the end of the day, and there may be people that disagree and there may be people that are correct, but Ms. McAuliffe is the one who had to talk with the people at the state to determine what was eligible and what was not. If they told us something wasn't eligible, there is no way that I would want her to incur the liability of putting her name on the form, putting in reimbursement for it when she was told it wasn't eligible.
And
because
I'm not suggesting that we should. Yeah.
No, I understand that. I just want to, make sure she was looking to protect the town's backside on this, so that, a little bit down the road when they do these audits, and, I know some people think these audits aren't going to happen, and why don't we just take chances in that? If the audits happen and they come looking for the money back, on certain things, I'm sure it's not going to be at a great time. And, and again, the liability is going to probably end up falling to, the person who ended up signing the form. So I appreciate all the effort that she's put in and trying to make sure that, that we handled this as best we could and in the right way.
All right, thank you. Chelsea, did you want to add anything
No,
to that?
I'm good.
Okay, I saw
Okay.
your mic. Marty, I'll come to you after Andrew. Andrew, you're muted.
I don't have any questions. I mean, I guess that on this, I think I might have some related questions on CARES, FEMA in relation to the Board of Health budget coming up, which is next on the agenda. So maybe I'll wait to ask them.
Mr. Haley.
Yeah, I guess I want to, square the circle on the previous discussion. I'm not aware of any unbudgeted expenses that, whether through a reserve fund transfer or otherwise, that the town had to dip into another funding source because we weren't able to cover the cost of that. Am I wrong about that? In other words, there isn't an expense that was incurred during this, hopefully soon to end pandemic that was COVID related, unbudgeted, that either through CARES or FEMA, the town was not able to cover, or am I wrong about that?
So their definition of unbudgeted for the CARES and FEMA both is a little fuzzy, but basically they deemed it as an expense that you wouldn't normally pay for. Like, does the library usually buy, a boatload of hand sanitizer? Not usually. or masks, or if you could just, and that's again, because compliance and eligibility were such a big part of these programs, you had to prove that it was something that you needed, that, and it's not to say that it wasn't, but was that in your budget, 18 months prior, before COVID? It probably wasn't, bags for the family and youth to lock up, patient files when they brought them home. That wasn't in their budget prior. So that's where we kind of had to, make the justification. Again, all these expenses had to be justified and thought through before going on the report.
Okay, maybe I wasn't clear with my question. I don't doubt that at all.
Okay.
I just want to make sure that I'm not missing something. And the thing I'm hoping that I'm not missing is that if there were COVID related expenses during this last, now whatever it is, 23-month period, that the town felt were necessary to incur to address the purchase of supplies, the creation of a testing program or otherwise, there isn't an expense that falls into that category that we didn't get covered either by CARES or FEMA.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I want to make.
Sorry,
In other words, there's not some, there's two sides to whether it's conservative or aggressive. The one side is identifying things that might be covered. The other side is making sure that these unexpected expenses, these unbudgeted expenses, are in fact being taken care of by one funding source or another.
Yes.
And my understanding, and you're nodding, so I'm assuming my understanding is correct, is that those expenses, whether through CARES, FEMA, maybe there's something else out there I'm not aware of, were in fact covered. So in some respects, maybe the answer is, we didn't have as many unbudgeted expenses, as well as being careful about dotting our I's and crossing our T's. I just don't want to make folks thinking that somehow the town of Southborough dropped the ball on unbudgeted expenses that weren't covered here. Our unbudgeted expenses were covered either through CARES or FEMA.
Yes, Marty, I would agree.
All right, thanks.
Did you have something, Andrew?
So go ahead, Andrew, and then I'll go.
Okay, because now we're this is dragging on a little bit, but just to complete Marty's thought that, Mark said that the testing was also covered by a state source. So that's another bucket you have to consider.
Exactly. There were many buckets out there. Similar to ARPA, Andrew, now we have a program. ARPA has a state program that they have, programs running here and there and other additional money that's out there. So yes, we have worked, and with ARPA, we're working with the consultant too, to make sure we're making the most of our allocation. But just even on the school side, they ended up spending $84,000 out of one of their grants for technology. Technology was also covered under CARES, but if you recall, the CARES had a deadline and then it got extended, and you have to receive the money, the goods by the deadline. So they couldn't do it by the CARES deadline, so they opted for another source, and that fit in their budget, that fit in their funding, Sudoku, which was, all these grants together. So, we did cover unbudgeted expenses. The needs of the town were met with the funding that was available.
Is that it, Andrew? Okay, Carlin, I'm going to kind of go just briefly. I was going kind of the same place Marty was going, that, if you take a look at what we submitted to FEMA, how many of those items could we have also put through CARES, which would have utilized the majority of the CARES money that was spent. The difference being, as you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have an audit more so, we have an audit on the front end with FEMA versus on the back end down the road. And I will say that at our last MMA meeting, there was discussion among some of the members about some of the things that were submitted. Everybody submitted in a big rush at the beginning for things, and now they're second guessing whether they're going to get hit for those things, once the audits for CARES eventually take place, whenever they take place. So I appreciate the path that was taken. I think we have a clear understanding of where we're at. I appreciate Sam, but I don't know that we left any money on the table. I think if we combine what we put through FEMA, could we have spent more? Probably. Might it have been issued down the road? Maybe. I think we were under a gun with deadlines to do certain things, and the guidance was ever changing. So I'm appreciative of the more conservative path on this one, I guess, Sam, because again, I don't view that money was left on the table because it went to one or the other. So it was still a funding source that was there.
Yeah. Reasonable people can have different opinions about things.
Absolutely. Sam,
Yeah.
as I said
appreciate the
before,
explanation. Thanks.
I respect your question, and again, that's it. Any other discussion on the quarterly? And I think that's the last piece we had on that. So that being said, we'll move on to the update on the fiscal year 23 budget. Is this going to be you, Mark, or is this going to be Mr. Ballantyne? Or a combination of both?
No, you know what? I'm happy to let Mr. Ballantyne handle this piece as well.
Hi, Brian.
Sure. Hi. So, as you know, right by now, we got some cucky news the last week or two about the regional assessment, and due to a fairly significant student shift, it resulted in a higher proposed assessment of a little over $400,000, I believe. That kind of changed some things. So we're at a 4.63% increase without any shift, and that goes up about 2% to a 6.75% estimated, of course, shift, at a 12% shift, which the town assessor seems to be thinking that that's pretty much where we should be focusing on, that 12% area. I did eliminate the low 7% that we had. I don't think it's even worth tracking that anymore. Probably not even the 10, even though I've kept it. So that's bad news. So tonight, I don't know how far the board wants to go, and it may not be. The budget's not going to be done tonight. We still have some loose knots or loose ends. We still have the Assabet assessment, which I just got an update today on. And I've got some budget tweaks to make to some of the operational departments to put in. There's nothing large, nothing huge, but they're going to change a little bit. So we've got that. We've got the collective bargaining agreements that are still going on that town administrator is guiding. And I thought one thing we could maybe knock off, and I hate to say it, I hate to give it up, but that the free cash that we're holding aside, I'm not sure who wants to do that anymore. I think that we have $330,000 that, the idea was to maybe keep that aside or transfer to stabilization or something. And the discussion was really good about it. I think it was a good year to start that discussion. I'm not sure that this is the year to implement that. I kind of think that this latest regional wrinkle probably puts the stake in that idea. So that's something the board could address. And I was hoping the board maybe could just, offer if they would like to see any other departments, feelings on the conservation department and the building department in particular, because they are proposing to add staff and we're still carrying that in the budget. The free cash, I think that's about it. And anything else the board wants to address. I get the sense that we all agree the capital's pretty much wrapped up, I think, even though the board hasn't voted on it. It doesn't seem that there's too many issues there. So that might be a good thing. And recreation, I think, is meeting tonight. And they have a couple of items that the recreation director and myself and Carla were spoken about regarding the 911 support fee for their debt and the recreation revolving fund. So I can't speak to it tonight because I don't know what's going to come out of that meeting, but we did express to the recreation director that we're obviously trying to see the best support the town can get from those funds. So That's kind of my list. I don't know where you want to go with it, but I get the easy part of starting it, and then I guess you guys get the hard part of discussing it.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So I think, Mr. Purple, correct me if I'm wrong, at our last meeting, we had discussed using the revolving fund for the building department budget. I'm sorry, the building department position using the revolving fund, correct?
The proposed part-time position, that's correct.
Okay.
And Mr. Ballantyne and Ms. McAuliffe have taken a look at that fund, and based on the amount that's being requested by the building commissioner, that fund would be able to sustain that part-time position for fiscal 23. And again, that's assuming we have somebody for 12 months. But we don't feel comfortable with the history of it to say that it could be a permanent funding source for it, but it will get you through fiscal 23 and maybe give an idea of, the value of the position, see if it works out that way, or if there is another way to try to provide the service, through another avenue. So it does give a chance to look at that. So that is an option. If the board wanted to pursue that, that amount could come out of the budget, and then it would just be drawn from the revolving fund for fiscal 23.
Okay, thank you. And Brian, the $400,000 difference on the assessment, that's included in the 4.63?
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Madam Chair,
yes.
just one point to that increase that we received on the regional school assessment. The issue, the reason that we saw such a big shift back towards us this year and Northborough saw a small shift, we both saw reductions in students over last year. The problem is we only reduced one student. Northborough reduced 84 students. So that's what swung the pendulum back towards Southborough in terms of carrying the bulk of the assessment. So
Right.
I just wanted to make sure, I asked the superintendent, he said there's a number of factors, but that is the driving factor, is they reduced 84 students, we reduced one.
Okay. Marty, go ahead.
Yeah, just on that, Mark, was that because the incoming class was 84 students or thereabouts fewer than the outgoing class, or was there some sort of exodus? Or do you know?
I'm getting a little out of my depth.
Okay.
I don't know if Mr. Ballantyne can rescue me on this one, or it's the timing of the year when they have to do the calculations. It's the number of students that they have at that point. So there must have been, to your point, some level of exodus.
Wow.
To create
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
All right. Thank you. So Brian, we'll go through, and I think it's really important, and I know we're having a little bit of an ARPA discussion later, but I think we need to at least put on the table to consider how we may utilize some level of ARPA. I think for me, and I'm sure for all of us, 6.75 is just, it doesn't work. It's unsustainable. It's not a benefit to the taxpayer. So I certainly would be in support of the free cash going towards lowering this. I think that the citizens deserve a break in any way that we can find to do it best serves us all. So that's my soapbox. I will jump off, and Andrew, will start with you anyway. Go ahead.
Okay, I agree with you on using the 333 towards the budget, but Brian, does your number, does that already include using the 333 toward the budget? No, okay.
No. So that would bring it down to about 3.92 on the non-shift and to about 6 even, or close to 6 even.
Yep.
On the shift. So.
Okay. So, I mean, Lisa, are you kicking off kind of a round of, big picture discussion about what to do next, or?
Sorry about that. I think, Brian's put some legitimate questions. We're getting down to the wire here. March 1st is coming up, and we're still at potentially 6.75, or what did you say, Brian? Right around 6. So I think these are discussions we have to entertain. I know that the ARPA committee is meeting. I know that, they have till 3/1 to come back to us with some things, but I think we as a whole, as a board as well, need to really take a look at if there is any opportunity for, you know, one-time expenses that we may be able to utilize. I mean, ultimately, again, my 2 cents, Andrew, it's the taxpayers' money ultimately. And if we can do something on a year such as this, I would certainly be interested in having the conversation.
Having a conversation with the ARPA committee about using some ARPA funds to reduce the overall tax increase, to use some ARPA funds for expenses in the FY23 budget.
Well, that's the question. I mean, ultimately, the Board of Selectmen decide for ARPA. And this ties a little bit into the later conversation as well, as they're looking for some level of guidance from us. I know there was an email in the packet. I don't want to get into too much detail on it, other than to say my response basically is we want them to be some level of independent and not us set the parameters and some guidelines of what we're looking for. So maybe that ties into the conversation as well, Andrew, where, you know, whether this board, and Marty, I'll come to you as you're next. Okay, sorry.
I do have something to say, but that was not, I'm just stretching my hand. Sorry about that.
All right. So, I mean, again, Andrew, this is why this discussion is on here, to figure out the best path, you know, through the board. So could we go and give the ARPA suggestions to think about for a March 1st deadline? Yeah, we could, but I think ultimately it's our responsibility to, you know, what we do as far as helping the tax rate. So I don't know if that answered your question, but we're open to suggestions tonight.
Yeah, because look, so in the memo that Carla did about the CARES, FEMA, ARPA, we have a little over $1.5 million for ARPA right now. Like, we wouldn't be considering using anywhere near to close to that. It would be only $100,000 or 75 or 100. It would be something like that. It wouldn't really. The ARPA committee would still have a lot of leeway to think about interesting things to do with the money. But no, I am kind of on the same page as you on this.
Okay. I mean, again, Andrew, listen, I'm interested to hear what everybody's thoughts on this are. I mean, we just have to do something. And go ahead.
Okay, Brian, on the budget, and I'm apologies if I asked this question before, but there is a huge reduction in community preservation funds. And is that because we're not going to have, can you explain that? Is because we're not really going to have CPC expenses this year, or as many as we have traditionally?
Yes, I believe they're only working on one project this year, and it's small.
Okay.
It's only
All right.
60,000, so that's all it is, and it doesn't affect the general fund at all.
Okay. Well, those are usually some of the most interesting discussions at the annual town meeting, and I guess we will not be having those types of discussions this year.
Right about that.
Ms. Malinowski.
Thank you. Just to comment back to the building position. So one of my concerns about conceptually putting that position into the revolving account is that you're mismatching your revenue with your expenses, which I don't love. That being said, I also don't want to put something in the budget for a position that, for me, I'm still unclear whether we actually need those hours, whether we would actually be able to fill those hours. So I don't want to increase taxes thinking we might get a person for a year, but if you're putting it into your operating budget, then I think you need to make sure you budget for it. So my point being that if we think that that's the right decision, then I would support paying for it in FY23 out of the revolving account, and revisiting in 6 months into FY23. I'm not convinced that we need the number of FTEs or the number of hours added to what's already in that job or in that department. That's my first point. The second one is I agree that the 333,000 should go back into the budget. I would love nothing more than to take ARPA funds and spread it over the next 2 years to reduce taxes, but I just don't think that that's a fiscally responsible decision. I think that we're going to create a lot of, I just think that's just going to create financial woes in 2 to 3 years. But what I would request of the finance team is that they model out the next 3 to 5 years on so I think this year our operating expenses are going up 2%. So assume, take the last 3-year average of operating expense increases, take an average of that, model that out with what we have in the current capital plan, so that so that we would know if we took, and I don't think 100,000 is not even 0.25% on the tax rate. So I really don't think doing 100,000 really makes any sense unless you're going to earmark it directly to a one-time cost. But model that out over the next 5 years and really see then what is that going to do to the tax rate when we don't have that sustainable revenue replacement anymore. Because I think that's what the taxpayers need to understand is, yeah, we could take this 3.1 million and relieve it now, but then in 2 years from now, we're going to have a 20% tax increase. I'm just making that number up. I don't know if that's the number, but I think that's an important thing for us to see, advisory and the ARPA committee. So the other thing I'm thinking is if we get a list of one-time expenses in our current FY23 and just really look at those for FY23 to see if there's anything in there. I mean, Brickneck Hill may be one, but I also want to match it up with what does the capital plan look like for the next 5 years so that we're not dipping in too much on capital things, or are there things in the next year or two that we would accelerate this year so that we kind of offset it. So those are kind of my thoughts. In terms of the budget, I know there's been conversations around the balances that are in revolving accounts right now. Is there anything that we can move into revolving accounts to pay for things? So maybe having the departments in that have revolving accounts and see if we can have a discussion with them around any expenses that can be taken out of the operational budget. So those are kind of my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Mr. Haley.
I like the idea of the revolving funds that Chelsea just raised. In terms of the 9/11 fund, I'm not remembering well right now. Does the state have a say in what we can do with the fees there, or is that entirely our call? Do you know, Brian or Mark?
Well, the fees for that particular, they're assigned to that field, that location. So you can't use them on anything else other than anything in relation to that field.
Okay, all right. But in terms of the amounts of the fees that can be charged, that's our call.
No, and I think Tim is actually proposing to raise those fees for next year. So yes, we have latitude on the fee structure.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, that putting on my old lacrosse hat from North Row, South Row Youth Lacrosse, it always, it was a good deal, and I think it should stay a good deal for the town-based programs. But it also was one of the reasons it was popular is because it was a great deal for some of the men's programs and the like from surrounding towns. So to the extent there's elasticity in the demand, I would certainly be in favor of increasing those fees. I think the free cash is an easy call, given particularly the news we got from Algonquin. I'm sort of where I am on ARPA, where I was at the beginning, where I agree that we don't want to sort of fiddle with the budget in a way with ARPA funds that creates, sort of a false reality in terms of what we're doing with our operating expenses on a year-to-year basis. That being said, what I always thought, and what I continue to think in terms of ARPA, is that, and to the extent the ARPA committee wants to know my thoughts, they can hear them. And that is that what makes sense for, this fiscal year, next fiscal year, for the fiscal year, maybe the fiscal year afterwards as well, to identify capital projects that the town was considering anyway. And in terms of this year, capital projects that are already on the the approved list by the capital committee, and identify those as expenditures that we can address with ARPA funds. That has the multiple function of not relating to the operating budget, of addressing a capital need, and because it impacts the tax rate, of reducing the taxes. I also think it's important, though, for the town to identify, and this is from my mind, the really important function of the ARPA committee, from a variety of not long shot wish list, but things that have been in the back of the mind of whether it's the Board of Selectmen, whether it's the Department of Public Works, whether it's another department that has significant capital expenditure items that they've been thinking about, trying to plan for, et cetera, that those be identified and prioritized by the ARPA committee for some amount in the $1 million to $2 million range, with the remaining $1 million from the three that total will be get being used for capital projects that the town was likely going to do anyway, and that offers tax relief for at least this year, next year, and maybe the third year as well. That's my view of how this money should be used. It hits a number of different and I think important buckets. So ARPA committee, those are my thoughts. I don't know if anybody else on the board agrees with them, but I think that's the crude structure of how I'm thinking about the benefit that the town can get from the ARPA funds. And Brian, just to conclude, if, for instance, let's say, for the next 3 years, we were thinking about $1 million in capital projects that we were going to be able to take off the tax rolls, with, again, crudely, looking at $300,000 or $400,000 per year. If in this tax year we reduced the total budget by, let's say, $300,000 by using ARPA funds, so assume a couple of things. Number one, that the free cash is a done deal and it's coming back in on the revenue side of things. And assume that another $300,000 in ARPA funds was used to address a capital need that obviously is going to reduce the amount of money on the FY23 budget side of things. Just roughly, not going to hold you to it, but roughly, what would that do to the tax rate?
You're probably coming down close to the 5 area, probably still above it, but not by much.
I thought we were at 3 something if we took the free cash.
Oh, no, I'm talking with the shift. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Not the shift.
we're always doing 2 percentages. So yeah, no, we're down to 3.92. So in that case, we'd be close to 3. We'd be still above 3, but close.
Okay. So again, I have no idea if anybody agrees with me, but that's sort of my view of how ARPA could help the town, both short-term and long-term. Great, thanks.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks. Yeah, Lisa, to respond to your original point there, I do think we need to be careful to consider the issues relative to taxpayers, tax rates, and so forth. But I think the other side of that one for me is that I'm not convinced we're helping the taxpayers if we wind up cutting important programs that people depend on. So that's the balance that I'm trying to achieve here. And I'm certainly in favor of using the free cash to go into the budget. I'm on record previously as saying I wouldn't mind spending a small amount of the ARPA money, a couple $100,000, something like that, to again help offset the hit to the tax rate. And as Marty suggests, find some interesting one-time projects that we can use to fund that, and not bet too much on the future with that. I'm also in favor of Chelsea's good idea about using the revolving fund building for the building hours. And I also am strongly supportive of the conservation hours, even though that's in the budget. It'd be great if we had another way to do that, but they've been sort of behind the 8 ball for years in terms of hours. And I think that's an important function that we ought to fund. And I guess playing off of one of Marty's comments, going back to a comment that Andrew made early on in the ARPA process, I think there's great value in swinging for a big one here somehow. And as Marty suggested, $1 million or $2 million to do something that's significant, to have long-term impact on the town, rather than to find 25 different $100,000 projects or whatever that we could do. I think you can do some of the smaller projects, but it would be great if the committee can come up with good ideas for 1 or 2 significant projects and use some of that ARPA money for that. So that's sort of where I am on all the issues. And if we wind up with a shift version of 5% to 6%, that's painful, but I think that's, to me, a reasonable place to aim for here. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Sam. So I agree, Marty. With it makes sense to have some offset and then to have a bigger project. So I guess we're kind of getting into the request, our last item as far from ARPA, the ARPA committee. We're looking just for some guardrails, and I think we just put them out there. Is everybody in support of basically guiding ARPA that, we're more interested in some larger scale projects in the $1 to $2 million range potentially? That would be our priority for them. I think there seemed to be general consensus of that. Chelsea, I know Sam's already said it, Marty's already said it, Andrew's shaking his head yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think just as long as it's on
Capital.
on our radar already,
Yeah.
Nothing,
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want to leave a project that we know needs to get done to go do some pie in the sky something. I think it needs to make sense for where the town's headed. And so yes, in general.
Okay, so that's the message that we'll send to the ARPA committee is, we're looking at something that's potentially already on the capital plan, that's already been discussed and had some level of vetting done. Does that make sense to everyone? Go ahead, Sam.
It makes sense. On the other hand, I hate to exclude pie in the sky. I mean, I think that one of the things the committee ought to look at is stuff that is not on the radar. And I have great confidence in the capital committee. On the other hand, nobody has perfect foresight in the world here. And so I certainly think the focus ought to be on larger projects. And clearly we're only going to be able to afford probably one of those. And I think the other thing in parallel, they ought to be looking at smaller projects to use the additional capacity. So to me, it's a sort of a parallel track there that would be interesting to hear their thoughts about.
Yeah, so, and I was going to bring this up in our later discussion as well. There was talk at the capital committee meeting as well regarding potentially the renovations of Cordova Hall. I know we've been talking about that for a while. It's been on everybody's radar. That the time sensitive nature of the senior center, it's being conveyed to the ARPA committee, but they have the opportunity that was shared at the capital meeting that they can actually not have to wait for ASABIT. They can actually put this out to bid and we can get this done potentially this summer if there's an interest to do that. So I just want to, toss that out there and let the board know that that's something that is on the capital plan. It's not necessarily on the capital plan for this year, but it is on the capital plan, and there is the opportunity to, bring this forward sooner rather than later, because obviously there's a bid process involved. And so that just to kind of keep that on the radar of the board as well. I think we'll have a bigger ARPA discussion on the 1st, if the ARPA committee has anything to submit to us at that time for fiscal year 23 budget. But I just wanted for that to be on the radar for everybody, because there is an opportunity to, again, something that's been out there for a long time, to potentially move that forward. And also there was a discussion obviously regarding the Breakneck Hill as well as another opportunity. So I will just toss those two things out there, and that basically closes the loop on the last item anyway. So we kind of incorporated it. So, so Brian, I think you've got your answer on free cash. I think what the number may or may not be for ARPA monies, I think, as Chelsea's looking for a model, I think that may play into, some of the discussions, and we'll put it back on the agenda and everybody can, spend some time thinking about it. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, can we get a timeline to meet with advisory too?
Yes, that was.
And see where they're, like, when they're gonna be done, and, get a meeting sooner rather than later. Because Mark, do you have a date yet on when we need to have, I know we don't have a town meeting date, but do you have kind of a timeline on when we need to have everything in for the warrant and wording?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a chicken and the egg discussion. It was almost like, well, let's talk about the town meeting date, but let's assume the town meeting date at the earliest is, last week of April.
Yeah.
We should be approving assigning a final warrant, maybe right around the end of maybe a special meeting near the end of March. Simply to sign the warrant. So we should have everything wrapped up. So by the 15th, you should be in pretty good shape, hopefully.
By March 15th?
Yes.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Is that on the budget or all the other articles on the warrant too? Because there's still a couple placeholders.
In a perfect world.
Okay, in a perfect world, everything.
Well,
right.
I will offer the caveat that council review seems to be quicker. So we're getting answers and getting responsiveness on some of this stuff a little bit quicker than we may have in the past. So that helps with the timeline a little bit. But it would be good to get things pretty much wrapped up and at least have draft language in and being reviewed by council, by that second week, or by the week of the 15th March.
So Chelsea, maybe an answer to your question, we definitely need to schedule that meeting. It's just a matter of whether we try to incorporate it in our March 1st meeting. And I think there's a lot of decisions we have to make prior to an advisory meeting. Potentially, we really need to decide where we're at. So we can add an extra meeting the second week in March, specific to a joint meeting with advisory. And we can find out their availability. If everyone has availability on the 8th, if everybody wants to take a quick look, we can do see if advisory is available for a joint meeting that week anyway. But we'll shoot for the 8th potentially, if that works for everybody's schedule, and we'll go from there. Sam, thank you. Appreciate it. Andrew, at this point?
I think you can assume yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Assumptions are good. Marty? Okay. All right. Chelsea? Okay. Tentatively. So Mark, we'll reach out to Kathy tomorrow. We'll do that joint meeting, but hopefully we'll have some more concrete answers from us as far as a path of what we're looking to do as well. So. All right, Brian, is that enough of answers for you? Hey, you got the free cash.
We made progress, so thank you.
We did make progress. And again, we should have some information from the ARPA committee as well. So, all right. Thank you very much. Next up on the agenda is the Board of Health. Ms. Malinowski, I see you have members present. We'll bring them over. You can call your meeting to order.
Thank you. So Vanessa, if we could bring over Dr. Alker, Dr. Medina, Ms. West, and Ms. Sacco, please. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm going to call the Board of Health meeting to order at 8:07 p.m. on February 15th, and all board members are present.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to, I guess, see you is the right way to say it. It'll be nicer soon. Hopefully we'll be back to in person. So welcome. Chelsea, we'll kick it off to you or whomever you want to kind of give us an update of where you're at in your budget, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So as you're all aware, we currently have 2 full-time employees that are working in the Board of Health, and we also share our business assistant with the assessor's office. So she is 0.6, that's Barbara Speary. And then Taylor West is our public health nurse, and she is working 40 hours a week, but is also in the FY22 budget, budgeted at 15 hours a week. And the remainder of her salary is being covered by CARES/FEMA, depending on which month you look at in the FY22 budget. And then Dr. Alker is 30 hours a week, and she is budgeted at 17.75 hours in the FY22, or 17.25. I can't remember if it's 25 or 75, but in that ballpark. So the current proposal for the FY23 budget, and Vanessa, do you mind bringing it up on the screen so everybody can see it? And I can speak to it while she does that. So the current proposal includes both Taylor and Heather's full-time hours. So increasing Taylor from 15 to 30 and increasing Heather from 17.75 to 30 hours.
Sorry, Ms. Malinowski, were you looking for the Board of Health budget?
Yes.
Okay, hang
on. So that is, and Vanessa, I can share my screen if that's easier. I have it up on mine. You want to do that?
Okay, hang on one second.
Sure. And that's really the only change other than the SAP increase for the business assistant or business admin. And when that comes up.
Chelsea, can I just ask one question? So
go ahead.
Taylor's 40 hours or 30 hours?
Taylor will be 40.
She will be, okay, I thought you said 30, so I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Sorry, and Heather will be 30. Yep, and that's what they're currently, that's what they're currently under right now. Although working more than that in the last 6 weeks, or more than that. So this is, can everyone see my screen? Okay, so if you notice here, we have in the FY22 budget, this is the part-time salary because they're both considered in the budget part-time because they're less than 19 and a half hours. So that's why you see 0 in FY23 request and everything is put into the full-time request. So that's really the changes. If you remember, Dennis Costello does most of our septic inspections, Title V, everything like that. So we kept that contracted service number flat. We do have a backup this year that with Mr. Pazinski retiring, we backfill with someone from another town. So that's the budget request. So it's not really new hours for the department, but it's new funds coming out of the operating budget.
All right, thank you, Chelsea. We'll go around. Mr. Healy?
I'm good on this.
Okay, Mr. Stivers?
I'm good with it. Great to have that in the budget, more permanent here. So I think that's the right direction. Thanks.
Mr. Dennington?
Hi. So do we have any concern that let's say in a year from now, the COVID situation subsides and we just have less of a need for both positions. You know, this is a discussion that I followed since I got an advisory when I was on advisory 2 or 3 years ago. And I think I'm at the point where I definitely believe that you look back and say, like, wow, before COVID, we budgeted only $31,000 for full-time salaries for this department. And the number is, way too low. I see now the need for at least, a full-time public health director. And then my concern has always still been, I understand now that we have the intermunicipal agreement, if I've got the terminology correct. Okay, I'm just thinking long-term about how we can be most efficient and regionalize as much as possible. Now, I know that when this discussion came up in one of the last budget cycles, the Board of Health was explaining that, well, no one's going to regionalize with us unless we have something to give, right? So I guess if, I don't know if Marty and Sam's, we're indicating there that this question is still, these questions are resolved in your mind. I mean, they're still unresolved in my mind. And, on the ARPA discussion, this is the thing where I patiently waited to put this thought into where I think it really belongs on the agenda is ARPA. I completely understand. It really, the spirit of it is you use it for capital items rather than, okay. But this is something where there would be no disruption to the level of services provided by funding the full-time nurse. Okay.
Can I just stop you for 1 second? So I'm going to talk about that in the next item, and I'm happy to talk about that now because the board actually has taken a position on a request for this. So do you want me to just explain?
Yeah, and that may explain why Sam and Marty had no questions. Okay.
Okay. So currently in the FY22 budget, the public health director position is budgeted at like 65,000. And the nurse position's budgeted at about 33,000. So with the public health director position to go fully funded would increase by about 50,000, and the public health nurse position would increase by about 60,000. So the board has gone through having Labor Council come in and talk about these two positions in particular, because if you remember last year when these positions were posted and hired, they were not in the SAP as full-time positions. So therefore they were hired under contracts. And there was just no mechanism for the Board of Health to do it any other way. So that was the only option. So the board opted to understand from Labor Council what the differences were between a contracted position and adding a position to the SAP. And so I think it was a very fruitful discussion. I think the employees have a better understanding of what the two options are. And the board made a decision to go through the personnel board process for the public health nurse position and also change that job title to be public health nurse, assistant health director, outreach coordinator, given the expertise and initiatives and desire to have that position do more and in addition to nursing. So I think there was a need. A lot of residents in town don't understand what the health department does. So we expanded on that role and are in the process of going through the personnel board process to have it rated and have a salary assigned to it, et cetera, and have it added to the warrant to add for a full-time position. The board also took a position to keep the public health director as a contract. It's a department head position. And we just felt like it made more sense to go that route. We didn't have as many reasons to do it as putting the nurse onto the SAP. And the Board of Health has the authority to do a 1-year contract under their state statute. So unlike the Board of Selectmen, Board of Selectmen have authority to do 3-year contracts for certain employees, and the Board of Health has jurisdiction to do it for public health director, public health. So those totally within their jurisdiction. We just chose to kind of go through the independent process for the nurse. So that being said, we met last week to talk about the email that we received, or the request we received from the ARPA committee on, given that especially public health kind of falls into one of those 4 buckets outside of the revenue replacement calculation. And we thought it would be prudent of us to request for the additional funds for the full-time public health director to come from ARPA. So that would be the 50,000. So essentially that gives the operating budget kind of a 2-year span to add 1 full-time employee at a time, so that we're not sitting here in a year from now requesting 2 employees like we did last year and this year. And, you know, as you mentioned, the regionalization and the shared service, you know, we're continuing to explore what the options are for that and seeing kind of, you know, how things are going to fit together. And so we wanted to come forward with a request for the 50,000. So I'll stop there and see if that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, I think it does. You know, I just wanted also the other people in the Board of Health to know that, you know, I think you might like, why do I keep asking the same question year after year after year? It's just, it's a concern I have. It's a hard question about how do you start to, from a town that has 10,000 people, really match up municipal budgeting to this completely new world. I do want you to let you know, as I say, and I know that Mr. Litt has very strong feelings about this. You know, I am now convinced that you look back and the town was not spending enough on public health, and that we're going to start to have some level of making this funding permanent and part of the tax base. It's just, I'm more kind of a gradualist, and that's what really drove my concerns. Thanks.
All right, Andrew, thank you. I'm actually along the same lines as Andrew on this. Those were some of my exact questions I had to ask Andrew about regionalization, you know, the grants, and whether, you know, based on the discussion we had earlier, if this might be an avenue to, you know, offset some of the tax base, you know, in the numbers that we were looking at. So, and I think this makes sense to me, to be able to take the year and for the Board of Health to figure out exactly what is the best path for them, for regionalization, and how we can best support the Board of Health department as a whole. So go ahead, Andrew.
I keep interrupting.
That's okay.
We'll get there, but so just following this in terms of, because this budget has a 53% increase, so that's built into the recap number that we've been talking about. I think if I follow this, that if the ARPA suggestion that the Board of Health is talking about is then adopted, that's another thing that would bring it down a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Marty, Sam, thoughts on that?
There's no way I can get into the detail that Chelsea just did. I understood 75% of what you said, which is a massive achievement for me. I guess my view is, I think in some respects, my view is that Southborough dodged a bullet up until 2020 or so, and then the bullets from 2020 were firing everywhere, so all of us got hit. But I have been convinced for a while that the spending on the Board of Health by the town of Southborough was penny wise and pound foolish, and so money, in my view, is fungible. If it's done on a short-term basis to somehow, in the same way we were talking about the building department, to either to prove or to find out that there's another funding source, that's fine with me. But from a resource necessity standpoint, I think this is, I won't say the bare minimum, but it's a minimum that the town needs to spend for the Board of Health. That's my view.
Go ahead, Tim.
Lisa, I would agree with Mr. Healy as usual. And I think that, again, for me, the issue is simply getting to the point where we've got a solid base of capacity in town. And to Andrew's point about regionalization, I don't think that hurts our ability to regionalize. In fact, the board is doing a great job now in terms of expanding regionalization reach. And I think we've already seen significant value from that in terms of access to additional services, food inspections, for example. I've been listening to the conversations about that we apparently were way behind on. And those are the kind of things I think that create a real risk for the public that have been kicked to the wayside historically simply because of lack of resources. So my longer term view is that you need to have a solid base of capabilities locally, and then you leverage that into regional activities, which is exactly what I see the board doing at this point. So I think that taking some ARPA money to fund the position for FY23 makes sense, but to me, again, that's path toward permanent funding as opposed to a one-time deal. So I think this is in the right direction. And I, again, recognize and appreciate the hard work that the board and the staff have done, particularly over the last couple of years during very difficult times. And hopefully we can get to a more stable situation going forward here. So thank you again for your efforts, and I support the proposal here. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So I'm just writing this down. Sorry. So process-wise, Chelsea, I think that again, I think it's pretty clear to the Board of Health that, you know, this board is very supportive of the work that you do and appreciates the unprecedentedness of, you know, the last couple years and how you guys have managed to make sure that things got done, and we're very appreciative of that. So if there's one great takeaway from tonight, I think that would be it for all of you. Is you're very appreciated. And, you know, I think we're supportive of this opportunity for ARPA to, you know, give you time, and you could come back. Certainly, as Chelsea said, it's a 2-year phase, and we've asked other boards and committees to do this over time, you know, to phase things in. So I appreciate the phasing of this, and, you know, look forward to seeing what you come back with next year, as well as what we can better do to serve the public and for us to serve the Board of Health as well. So I thank you for that. So Chelsea, I think you haven't. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I went off on my tangent there and didn't open it up to the Board of Health if they had anything else that they wanted to correct me on. Nancy or Safdar, do you have anything that you want to add? Sorry.
The one thing, my one word of advice is that when you're winning, you don't have to say anything else.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I think I just want to echo, you know, I think, honestly, Mr. Stivers, you said it beautifully. We have this core set of talent that we need. And it is only with that core set of talent that we can access regional services appropriately. We need someone on the ground locally to assess our needs. And then, yes, we can access whatever is available through our regional resources. So that's the imperative reason to keep these 2 positions going. Long term. If you look at the list of deficiencies, the list of things that we need to accomplish, it's a lot of things. And those are things that should be in place, you know, long term, and should never then be removed from any sort of day-to-day operations of a Board of Health. And we have that long list, and you've all probably seen it. So yeah.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you for Chelsea for all she's done this past her short little tenure. She's really done so much. So I can't thank you enough. And thanks for hearing us and seeing us and appreciating us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Lisa, do you want to I guess I'm just trying to figure out how this would work if we are going to use ARPA for the budget. So I assume that I would resubmit a lower budget to you. And then, and Carla doesn't, like, that doesn't need to go through on the warrant.
So process wise, and Mark, jump in here too. I think, yes, Chelsea, and that I think in our conversation that we're going to have, the correspondence we're going to have with ARPA, we would let ARPA know as well that, you know, there was the request and the board was supportive. This falls within that window of what Marty was talking about, outside of the 1 million to 2 million.
Right.
So this falls right in. So we'll make sure, I'll work with Mark on that, and we'll make sure ARPA is well aware that, you know, this board was supportive and for the reasons stated.
Okay.
Mark, is that correct? Process?
Yes, nope, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Chelsea, that brings us to number 3.
Yeah.
Mask mandate in town buildings.
Yes. So, as you know, there's a lot of moving parts right now that I'm sure Safdar, Heather, and Taylor can attest to, with the DESI guidelines and the CDC and DPH coming out in the last week or so. So I did add this to our joint discussion because I thought it was timely. And as you know, the selectmen own the town buildings, but obviously there's, you know, a collaboration between the Board of Health and the selectmen when we're putting these types of restrictions in. So we've had a mask mandate in town buildings since the end of August, beginning of September. The town-wide mask mandate was lifted by the Board of Health last week, I believe. So I just, and the Board of Health has not had an opportunity to discuss this because it was not on our radar in the beginning of last week, and so much has changed. So I would just like to open it up to Safdar and Nancy to kind of give any initial reaction to if and when we would relax the mask mandate in town buildings. So Safdar?
I'm going to say, Heather and Taylor.
Can I interject one thing?
Sure.
Just, and as part of that discussion, just today, the Department of Public Health lifted it, and why we wouldn't do the same.
Correct. So they, the Department of Public Health today did relax their advisory to say that individuals who are fully vaccinated did not have to mask indoors. It still recommends that people who are unvaccinated or immunocompromised or live with people who are immunocompromised should continue to mask indoors outside their homes.
Thanks, Taylor. Safdar?
I was actually going to ask to have Taylor summarize the new DPH advisory. So I think, you know, that's where we are moving forward, I think. And, you know, I think our town rates are significantly lower than they were even a week ago as well. So that's also the data that we're looking at. And Nancy, you can probably speak to hospitalizations falling as well.
Yes, actually, I worked yesterday and today, and out of 10 patients, we had no COVID. 2 had previously had COVID, but they're doing well. And yeah, it's been a long time coming. So I'm optimistic finally.
Okay, great. So are we comfortable with making a recommendation to remove the mask mandate in town buildings?
I am.
Okay.
Yep. And I think, yeah, and then replacing it with an advisory, or referring to the state advisory to be still present in all municipal buildings.
Okay.
Agreed. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing I would add is for, you know, town employees who may feel uncomfortable with this, I think, you know, allowing them room to mask or distance, or, you know, allowing them extra mitigation that they would like, given that the public may come in without a mask on. There may be employees who will have immunocompromised people at home, employees who, for whatever reason, weren't able to vaccinate themselves. So I think that's the only, you know, caveat to that, is protections for them.
Okay.
Right,
Kelsey,
with our
can I ask-
FEMA funds, we did get masks, so there are still masks available that we got with the FEMA funds.
Okay, can I ask a question? So based on the DPH advisory that came out, does that advisory also not recommend social distancing, 3 feet, 6 feet? Or it's
Doesn't
just
address
mask?
that. Yeah, it
Okay.
doesn't address that. It only addressed masking.
Only masking. Okay. All right. So Chelsea, do you need to take a vote for you guys to recommend that? Or
No, I don't think, I mean, we can if you want to. I mean, I think the selectmen need to vote
Right.
on doing the lifting the mask mandate, but I don't think, Mark, do you agree procedurally?
Yeah, I think the board, should take a vote to, as to what they'd like to do with the mask mandate for the buildings.
okay. So
I'm about to make a motion, but first I have a question, and maybe I lost it in what is Southborough's, and Andrew's not gonna let me move yet because he's got his hand up. What is Southborough's vaccination rate right now for those who are eligible to be vaccinated?
Sure. It's greater than 95%.
Okay.
Andrew, before Marty makes a motion, do you want to ask a question or comment?
Yeah, sure. So I was surprised at this. I think it's, very, very good news. I mean, I came into this thinking that this is something that still could wait, a couple more weeks. And this is just an unscientific kind of cautious sense of just wait a couple more weeks until rates fall even further, because this has been such an up and down cycle. But I guess now what I'm hearing is the Southborough Board of Health and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health are okay with relaxing the mask mandate in the town buildings. So,
If you want me to give you a picture of what our, daily cases are, I would say like each week, we get our reports from the state, but also just tracking it internally. They half every week. So last week we had 15 cases, which is pretty much back to pre-Omicron, even a little bit lower than Delta surge. So we're definitely headed in the right direction, and hopefully it will continue to fall.
Right. And also we've shown that we're nimble. I don't know if that's the correct word we put in the town one, but only for a month. And then, we put this one in the fall when rates started going up again for the municipal buildings. So hopefully our next variant doesn't come ever, or next winter, right? But I think we're nimble in following what's happening, right now. We're working with the schools as well to be working, we're working with the school district as well. But again, also they're leaving some room for being nimble.
So this vote doesn't affect schools. The school committee would have its vote.
No, correct. The DESI's made their right. The school committee is going to vote on school buildings. Right, but the DESI guidelines are changing as of the 28th of February. They don't have that state DESI mandate in place, and the districts will decide themselves for their school committee.
Okay,
Thank you. Marty, before you make the motion, we should decide, is the effective date going to be tomorrow? Or in order to get the signage and everything we need, Mark, should we make it? I guess the signage is just take down the old signage, but we need to put the advisory up, is my question. So should we make the effective date tomorrow or the day after? Just to allow what needs to take place. Your thoughts on that, Mark?
I think on behalf of facilities, it'd just be good just to give an extra day, just to replace all the signage and everything. I think that would be helpful. As Dr. Alker said, we're flexible and we're able to adjust and everything in that, and facilities does a lot of great things, but I'd like to give them an extra day just to get the signage and change that out.
Okay, so Marty, if we could do it effective 2/17, and just Chelsea, one quick thing, are you going to abstain from this vote? Or do you want to, you didn't take a vote on Board of Health. You can vote.
Right,
Okay.
I'll vote, that's fine. Just in terms of, so if we're not masking, And, people are probably going to start to want to meet in person. I guess Heather or Taylor, any concerns about having meetings live again? And there's probably other things that we need to talk about technology, but in terms of meetings.
I think maybe we'd want some time to review.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And
It doesn't mean necessarily, I think we should jump into
Yeah. Okay.
in-person meetings. Yeah, it is still winter and
Okay.
and we're
yeah, we
actually,
need a little time.
we're gonna kind of bring that up. I'm gonna bring that up under Chairman's report, because again, there's
okay.
technology issues as well, Chelsea, that would
Okay.
stop us from being able to do that right away. So we'll go there next, but I
So we
appreciate
can-
the question.
We can add that to the Board of Health meeting on the 8th. 3/8 is our next meeting.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect. I appreciate you thinking ahead. I'm sure Mr. Healy does as well. All right, Marty, I think we're ready for your motion now.
Yeah, this feels like hopefully the first in a series of positive watersheds. So I'm hoping that's the case. It feels good. So I move that the town of Southborough, for the public buildings that fall under the purview of the Board of Selectmen, adopt the mask advisory for vaccinated and unvaccinated residents, consistent with the state's Department of Public Health advisory issued this same day, which effective February 17th, which effectively lifts the mask requirement mandate that's been in effect for several months. That's my motion.
I'll second that with a slight correction that we're now the select board, I think, are we not officially?
I'm not,
Come on, Marty.
all right. I don't think that would have affected the legality of it, but amended to be select board, not Board of Selectmen.
Yeah. Select
All right.
board, 2 words.
All right,
Andrew.
and seconded by Sam. All right, roll call. Mr. Dennington,
Aye.
Ms. Melanowski, Mr. Haley,
Aye.
Mr. Stivers,
Aye.
and Ms. Braccio. Aye. Thank you. Thank you very much, Board of Health, for coming. Chelsea, I'll let you adjourn your.
Thank you. So I move to adjourn the Board of Health meeting at 8:40 p.m.
I second the motion and vote aye, Sacco.
And I vote aye, Medina.
And Malinowski's aye. Thank you for joining, Heather,
Thank you,
Taylor,
everyone.
Zafra,
Thank
Nancy.
Your support.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, that leads us to Chairman's report. Just a couple quick things. The resuming of in-person meetings, that all kind of fell together. So the legislature has extended the option of online meetings. Mark, is it through the end of July? Or is it the
July
beginning of
15th.
July? Thank you,
So,
Cindy.
yeah, middle of July.
So we still have the capability for Zoom meetings. Now, Mark, can you give an update on where Sam stands?
So at this point, Sam has kind of taken a step back from putting in place the Zoom integration software. I think they're looking at changing vendors. They've kind of put again, those efforts to make Zoom integration part of their taping process on ice. And they're looking at some other communities and how they've done it. And we're kind of back to square one on this whole thing. Miss Hale, Mr. Montijo, and myself are trying to work with Sam to figure out, how we can move this ball forward fairly quickly in terms of those pieces. I think the other thing too is, even if when we go back and Sam starts, covering the meetings again, Sam was covering selectmen and permitting boards and occasionally advisory. And they weren't covering all these other boards. So you've got this hundreds of hours of meetings that and hundreds of meetings that we have in our library on YouTube of boards and committees that you never would have seen, and you would have had to just assume the minutes were an accurate representation of what happened in the meetings. And so trying to find a way to continue to allow that level of transparency that we've been afforded, if there's a silver lining and things that have happened over the last 2 years, is that, you know, we've had a lot of people who've been able to watch meetings and catch up. And I know I've talked to some of you that are just, you know, you happen to be sitting on the beach, you happen to be here, and you just decided you wanted to watch a meeting, you know, so you could go back and you could catch up on these things. It's probably made for a more educated, you know, educated populace. But so that's going to be one of the things that we're going to have to figure out how to address, is how do we try to keep that moving forward.
Okay, so thank you. So a reason I put this on here is just wanted to give a brief update. Sam isn't ready to go back just quite yet. I am shooting for potentially, hopefully with some good update or something by the end of March. I think that a bigger discussion for another meeting is to consider where we want, you know, our boards and committees to go at this point, and if we'd like to see Zoom, the opportunity for Zoom to some level of continue for non-permitting boards, you know, whether we would like to approach our legislators and let them know that we'd like to see that continued. I think it gives a great opportunity. So just a brief update. It'll be on a future agenda. I just want everyone to start thinking about, you know, when we're going to be going back to in-person again. I would do it sooner rather than later, other than I have no desire to sit there with each of us with a computer and try to mute people. And if somebody's not there, the feedback, and, you know, rather do it in a much better way. And if we have to take an extra few weeks to do it, then so be it. So that's just a quick update. We'll have that on a future agenda. The next piece is Chief Hollis had shared just an update on the borough's jail diversion program. And it's kind of a synopsis of what's taken place over the last years. And the primary goal of the borough's JDP is to redirect individuals committing nonviolent offenses out of the criminal justice system and into more appropriate community-based behavioral health services. And as we're all aware, it was a grant that funded this with the boroughs. And I just wanted to share with the public some of the good things that have happened because of this. So in 2021, a total of 5 individuals with behavioral health conditions were diverted from arrest by Southborough police officers and into treatment facilitated by JDP clinicians, which is great. In addition to the benefit of diverting individuals in crisis from arrest, these diversions represented an estimated cost savings of $12,600 to the criminal justice system, $2,500 per arrest event. Also, the second goal of the borough's jail diversity program is to decrease the frequency of individuals with behavioral health conditions being referred to the hospital emergency department, the ED, for psychiatric assessment by police officers. In Southborough, 9 individuals were diverted from unnecessary hospital admissions due to the presence of a JDP clinician on scene to facilitate assessment treatment recommendations. In addition to the benefits of receiving care outside of the hospital, these emergency department diversions represented estimated healthcare savings of $36,000. So combined estimated cost savings due to the arrest and emergency department diversion activity equaled $48,600. And that's in Southborough alone. It was over $234,000 for all of the boroughs. So a great program that was instituted, and clearly it had great success. So just sharing that on behalf of the chief. Also wanted to share that we received the National Historic Designation for Southborough Center Historic District that the Historical Commission had put in. So that's a win for preserving history in the town of Southborough as well. So congratulations to the Historical Commission for that. And one last thing is a reminder for timely posting of board and committee meetings. As I was going back through minutes over the last month or so on different meetings, I'm finding there's a lot of boards and committees under the appointment of the Board of Selectmen that going back 2 and 3 years potentially had a request from the town clerk and the minutes weren't submitted. In a lot of these cases, they were approved, they just weren't submitted. So I just wanted to let the board know that I'm going to ask Mr. Purple to send out a note to all of the boards and committees that we have, making sure that the town clerk's office is up to date on their minutes and there's not requests sitting out there that don't need to be, as well as letting them know that if they can't get the minutes approved, they can certainly put a draft set of minutes with the draft watermark on there as well. So that's just an update to the board. So we can all be in compliance. And again, most of the ones that I found were already approved. So that being said, Thank you very much. Next up, members report, St. Mark's Working Group update. Mr. Dennington.
So the St. Mark's Street Park Working Group will have its first meeting tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And I will keep you updated. And if you're interested in attending and observing, feel free to do so. And that's really the substance of my report so far.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Purple, did you have anything under Town Administrator?
I didn't have anything. I think everything I'm doing is included in items.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Next up, consent agenda. We'll go down the line. We'll see if there's anything that's to be held. Anyone want to hold A? Sam, okay. B. I see none. C. I'm going to hold D and E. F. I see none. G. I see none. And H. I see none. Okay. That being said, do we have a motion to approve consent agenda items B, C, F, G, and H as submitted?
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
Aye.
And Ms. Braccio. Aye. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Stivers, item A.
On the minutes for February 1st, as usual, Bridget did an exceptional job. There's one change on line 442. Mr. Lavoie's name is misspelled. It's L-A-V-O-I-E. And that's
All right.
it.
That's it. That's pretty good, Sam.
Pretty
One
good.
for the length of those minutes. Is there anyone else that had any changes? I see none. All right. Do we have a
I've
move?
got one.
Okay, sorry, Andrew. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to echo what Sam said. These meeting minutes are excellent. I think on line 248, Eric Fernandez's last name ends with a Z rather than S.
All right. If that's it, thank you, Bridget. You did an amazing job. That being said, do we have a motion to approve open session meeting minutes February 1st, 2022 as amended?
So move.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Mr. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
Aye.
And Ms. Braccio, aye. Thank you. I actually just held D and F was because I wanted to thank Ms. Wittes for her many years of service on the Conservation Commission. I wish her well in everything she does going forward. And also I'd like to thank Mr. Lapine for stepping forward to start the process and start the discussion on a potential noise bylaw. So that was my only reasons for holding, was to express our gratitude to both of them. Mr. Healy.
Yeah, just on E, I mean, I agree with both of your sentiments, but it's part of our packet. And so as a result, it's part of the public record. And in Mr. Lapine's email, he references the group, and by the group, he's talking about the Noise Bylaw Committee. Lack of objectivity is in equal parts disturbing and insurmountable. And I have not watched every minute of the Noise Bylaw Committee's meetings, but I'm in the 80 or 90% range, and I have found them anything but lacking in objectivity. And I think resigning from the committee for whatever reasons is fine, but I don't think that is an accurate assessment of the people who are and continue to serve on that committee.
No, thank you, Marty. Completely agree.
I concur. I've been to almost all of those meetings myself, and I think we've had a good spread of opinions, and people have been actively debating the issues. I think they're making great progress, and so I think that is an unfair characterization as well. Thank you.
All right. Go ahead, Chelsea.
We just have a hand up in the audience.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yep.
And Mr. Mello, if we can bring him over. Thank you very much, Chelsea, for monitoring that.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mello. Welcome. You are muted. Good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I just want to say that I think the committee is working very well, and we love Peter and how he has helped bring this issue to the forefront of the community and so forth. So nothing against Peter, but we are trying to be a balanced organization to the citizens of who want a noise bylaw and need, and the ones that don't understand it. So nothing against Peter, but I just want to make sure that we are trying to be a very balanced committee to take care of our citizens.
Well, thank you. And I think the board supports those sentiments and is, again, very appreciative of the work that you guys have put in this short period of time. So thank you very much.
And Lisa, I sort of blame you for getting me into this committee. So
That's okay. I'll take that blame. That's not a tough one to take. But, thank you so much. Very much appreciate it.
my pleasure.
Awesome. That being said, do we have a motion to accept consent agenda items D and E as submitted?
So move.
And seconded.
Thank you. Roll call. Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Ms. Melanowski.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
Aye.
And Ms. Braccio. Aye. Great. Thank you very much. Next, continued discussion of annual town meeting date. So Mr. Hagerty had submitted some information. Ms. Hale, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and pulling that up. And I think, is he still in the audience? He was at one point.
No.
Oh, he's already been brought over. Wonderful. Good evening, Mr. Hagerty. Welcome. Thank you for sticking around. We're going to pull up your memo, share the screen, and if you want to just share your thoughts on it with the board, that would be great. Just give us 1 second to get it pulled up. There we go. I think there we go. Thank you, Vanessa. All right, Mr. Hagerty, welcome.
Hello. Well, you have before you the options you have, whether you choose to hold the meeting at the Trotter School on a Saturday, at Algonquin during a weekday, 2 nights back to back, either 2 nights 4, 5, 6, or 2 nights May 11, 12, 13. And you have an option for Neary Saturday outdoors. So it really is your flavor of whether you want to do it indoor at Trotter, indoor at Algonquin in early May, or whether you want to roll it outdoors. We can logistically handle any one of those.
Okay, and actually, Vanessa, can we bring Mr. Semino over as well? I apologize. Awesome. Thank you, Jim. So one of the things we are getting down to the wire on is needing to set a date. So based on the information before us, I think it's the most important thing for the board is to decide if they want to do a weeknight meeting. Then obviously Algonquin is probably the best bet at this point. And depending on what may be coming or may not be coming from the school with the feasibility study, Algonquin does have the option of up to 1,800 voters. So I think that's important, but obviously Trotter could do up to 1,200 as well. So I don't know if the board has a preference. We'll kind of go round table and just kind of get people's thoughts on what you've been thinking about up to this point. I mean, everybody's kind of must have some little form of idea of, what the best path may be to move this forward. So we'll start with Mr. Stivers this time.
Okay, thanks. I guess I've stated early on, I'm a fan of Algonquin. I think who knows how many people are going to turn out, but I think having that additional capacity is very helpful. And I think indoors, given the likely weather issues, make indoors very, very much more attractive. So my vote is for Algonquin.
Okay, Sam, I'm going to come back to you, but I should have done this first. Mr. Purple, do we know town council's potential availability on a May 4, 5, 6, 11, 12, 13?
I can give you part of an answer based on the
That's
date
okay.
you just threw. Council is available on May 4th and 5th at this point.
Okay.
So I do know for sure that he's available on those. I'm not sure on the others.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, Sam, did you want to add? We'll go to Mr. Semino to see his availability as well, but Sam, I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
I'm indifferent relative to the dates.
Okay, so are you in favor of a weeknight meeting?
Yeah, I mean, we've had this back and forth for many
know.
years, actually. So whatever we do, there are going to be people who are unhappy about it. And I think we need to keep moving on it. And indoors weeknight works for me.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Mr. Dennington.
Can I just go back to something Jim said earlier, and I didn't
Sure.
follow it completely. So for under the Trottier school, are you suggesting, I mean, the Saturday, March 26th is not going to happen. It's too soon. But did you say before that any Saturday Trottier was available, or?
No, I
No, okay. All right.
have not looked at other dates. March 26th was the.
That's the only one.
No, I have not looked at other dates at Trottier.
Okay.
But just if I could jump back, Lisa, a comment you made earlier about capacity. Those numbers you quoted, 1,800 at Algonquin and 1,200 at Trottier, that's assuming normal seating.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Jim. And again, as we kind of saw with Board of Health tonight, I don't know where they may be at that point, whether there's going to be distancing involved.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andrew, sorry.
You know, I think that the going to Algonquin is going to be something very new because it just has never been done before. But I think, you know, one of the things you're trying to convey with this memo, right, Jim, here is that Trottier is pretty tight for you, assuming that there is distancing. Also, you're listing their voters, but there's more attendees at the town meeting, right, than just voters. You know, I think what Sam's preference here to go for Algonquin, it's certainly you're not gonna have to worry about the space. You're gonna have the space. Again, it'll be something really different, a lot more driving to get there and different parking and all that. But you know, hopefully 2023 we can get back to normal. So long and the short of it, I am okay with the consecutive weeknights at Algonquin in May.
Okay. Ms. Malinowski.
I am good with Algonquin.
Any the specific dates?
I would do 4th, 5th.
5th. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. That leaves Mr. Healy.
I mean, Algonquin seems a pretty obvious choice here. Because I'm assuming, well, I don't know why you picked March 26th, but April was a problem because we're getting into youth sports on a Saturday, right? Was that part of your calculus, Jim?
Yes, but we had tentatively March 26th would have been in compliance with the bylaw, so that's what I stayed with that.
Okay. In terms of Algonquin, you've got May dates? Is nothing in April?
Correct. Those are the dates that the school has available for us.
Okay. I mean, and I had this is a little bit of bigger conversation, not conversation, but just as I've said a couple of different times, you know, we shouldn't be setting dates for things based on my travel schedule, but starting in about a month, my travel schedule for 2022 is a mess, not in a bad way, in a good way. I think I might be around May 4th, 5th, and 6th. I know I will not be around on May 11th, 12th, and 13th. I'm on the West Coast. But even more importantly than that, you know, the travel schedule I'm talking about includes in the fall, I'm going to be in Europe for at least 2, maybe 3 months. Followed up by a couple of West Coast trips. And as a result, May 11th, 12th, and 13th, in addition to being on the West Coast, I won't be on the Board of Selectmen because I'm not going to pull papers to run again because I haven't missed a meeting in 3 years and I'm not going to run for an office that I can't fulfill the requirements of. So May 4th, 5th, and 6th, I think I'm here. I think I can move a trip around and be available. May 11th, 12th, and 13th, I'm on the West Coast. That is an absolute lock. I've already got tickets. But again, I'm also not going to be on the Board of Selectmen unless we change the May 10th date.
Okay. I will just say, Marty, thank you. Thank you for stepping forward and being on the board. And thank you for allowing us to serve with you. From my perspective, it has been an absolute pleasure. And I wish you well on your trip to Europe, and I wish it was me, but
it's going to be it is going to be quite a trip, 500 miles of hiking. And I'll save my valedictory for later in April or May, but
all right.
But I don't want to get into that tonight, just because it's strictly logistics.
Yep. Nope. Okay.
And
Thank you.
I'll echo those comments, Lisa, and I will say I'll be very disappointed to miss having someone to agree with consistently.
So,
go ahead, Andrew.
okay, so we can infer that Mr. Stivers doesn't have a similar issue.
Not at the current time, but nobody's offered me a trip to Europe.
Sam, I'll work on agreeing with you. How's that? All right. That being said, can we, Mr. Semino, what does your schedule look like for May 4th or 5th?
So May 5th is open. May 4th is harder for me. We're assuming, I would just say that we're assuming consecutive weeknights. That's not required, although it's obviously preferred if we're going to do weeknights. And you know, I've been a Jim Hegarty fan since day one, but not tonight. I don't know why we divided this by venue necessarily, because we could be outside at Neary on the weekend of May, whatever, and that may be where we need to be, depending on availabilities. So if you set the 4th and 5th, I will make it work. The other days don't work. 6, 11, 12, 13 don't work for me, unfortunately. I think that's.
So in this, sorry, Paul, in Mr. Hagerty's defense, him and I had conversations about this, and I asked him to give the board options because we didn't know where we were going to be as far as COVID. And, you know, and again, we saw what happened tonight, that the mask mandate is off the buildings, and, you know, so we didn't know where we were going to be, and we wanted the option. So that was why this was done this way, Paul.
No, I understand about the options. My point was by venue, why it was divided by venue. So that's neither here nor there. And I'm making a little jibe at my compatriot, Mr. Hegarty. He understands. But meanwhile, yeah, if we are talking about Algonquin, then May 4 or 5.
Okay.
I'm open to other places and other times, is my point. That'll be up to you guys.
Okay, thank you. So in looking, Jim, at what you've presented, if we set the date for May 4th and 5th, which I think is pretty much a given after tonight, the ability to do it anywhere else other than Algonquin does not really work, correct? On a May 4th or 5th?
That is correct. May 4, 5 would be a Wednesday, Thursday night.
Yeah.
You can't do weeknights at Trotter because you'd be taking the auditorium, the gym out of play for 2 full days. And you really can't do that to Neary in the middle of the week with the schools. And you're not going to get attendance at a weeknight. You're not going to get this in 2 nights outdoors at Neary. So if you want to go 4 or 5, it's only over the high school there.
Okay. So, okay, you can unshare the screen, Vanessa. Thank you. So, Mr. Purple, we need a formal vote to set town meeting for May 4th and 5th at Algonquin. Do we need to set the time? Obviously, it would be the normal 6:30 and 7 o'clock. What have we done in the past on the nights? think it was 6:30.
I'll defer to the moderator.
Okay.
Or Mr. Hegarty, but I think it's 7.
Is it 7? Okay, that's why I asked. Mr. Semino?
Night one, evening one, day one, whichever it is. The first night of town meeting is, has always been 7:30.
Okay,
Second night is 7.
okay, perfect. All right, Chelsea, go ahead.
So can we start earlier?
Yeah.
Than that? I mean, I just think the commuting time doesn't seem to be as big of a deal as it was pre-COVID. I'm just wondering if we can move it up a little bit to try to get more in.
I don't know if that's a question for me or not.
It can be. Jim's got his hand raised as well. If you want Jim to take the first swing, Paul, then that's okay.
Yeah, I have a real concern starting at 7:30 over there for a couple of reasons. This is going to be a busy agenda, and we gotta be real risky of going to a third night, and that's going to cost us an extra a lot of money and take the schools out of play for a whole day as well. That's a really big deal. I would even suggest on the first night, instead of starting at 7:30, start at 6:30. Now, there's a couple of ways to think about this. Yeah, people are going to travel a little further to Algonquin, but the flip side of that is that the first 15 minutes or so of the town meeting are, once you have a quorum in place, it's administrative in nature. So I would suggest you consider starting the first night at 6:30 to do all we can to try to ensure that we complete this in 2 nights.
Mr. Semino, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I was about to say that I don't have a personal preference on that, so I'll defer to Jim.
Okay. Is everybody on the board good with? Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, question. The only concern I would have about starting at 6:30 is quorum. And that doesn't mean I'm not in favor of starting at 6:30, but I'm wondering, I think the law is still in effect that we can reduce the numbers for a quorum. So that's something we might consider. So that in fact, if we schedule it for 6:30, we can get going at 6:30. I think we can reduce it to like what 10% or 20% of the existing quorum.
Yeah, the governor's just done 10% for this new legislation. Yeah. So.
Anyway, so that's just, again, that would be my only concern about 6:30 is the quorum. But one way to address that is to adopt some version of what is allowed under the emergency statute.
Okay. So would we want to start 6:30 both nights then? Yeah. Chelsea saying yes. Sam saying yes. Andrew?
It's okay.
Okay. All right. Then, so I guess, do we have a motion to approve town meeting for May 4th and 5th at 6:30 p.m. each night at Algonquin Regional High School?
So move.
Is there a second?
Seconded with the only change being May 4th and if necessary, May 5th.
May 5th. Thank you very much. Perfect. Wishful thinking on my part, huh? Okay, perfect. Roll call. Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Ms. Malinowski.
Aye.
Mr. Haley.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
And Ms. Braccio, aye. Thank you very much, Mr. Semino and Mr. Haggerty. Appreciate everything.
Thank you. Good night.
Everything you do. Great, thank you. All right, next up, discussion of annual town meeting articles. Mr. Purple, you updated the warrant that was sent out to us. Do you want to add anything before we start taking a look at where we're at, who we may want to have come in, and so on?
So I think just a couple of things, the draft warrant. So we amended the packet online and sent you out the draft warrant electronically. I would just refer you to the second to last page, which is where there's 7 articles that are listed without any wording. At this point, those are the ones that we're still more in process than others. And the last three articles that are there, the turn back of bond, the placeholders, turn back of bond proceeds, codifying fall town meeting, changing the date of spring town meeting, and transferring a sum of free cash to stabilization fund. So I think we've made a decision this evening, or the board has made a decision in terms of the free cash. Therefore, that last placeholder is not going to be needed and would be removed. And then the placeholder for the turn back of bond proceeds, I've had a conversation with Mr. Ballantyne and Ms. McAuliffe, and that is going to be in the wrap-up motion for the budget. So all that will be taken care of in the wrap-up motion, so we won't need a separate article for that. The question I have is whether is this codifying fall town meeting, changing date of spring town meeting placeholder, as to whether that has some viability. The other four, the easements for St. Mark's Street Park and roadway, the noise bylaw, the feasibility study funds for Neary School, the scenic road bylaw, those are all still very much in play. And my understanding is there is language coming for all of those. So it's more just the codifying fall town meeting placeholder as to where the board may be with that. Is that something we're looking to keep, or is that something we're looking to remove?
So I can just share with you that Ms. LaVault and I, we've had multiple texts back and forth. It's been hard for us to meet. I would suggest at this point that we take that off. I don't know if that's going to be ready for a fall town meeting at this point. Not fall, annual town meeting. And then bring it up again next year. That would be my suggestion on that. So taking off the bottom three. Okay. That being said, I think one of the main things I was hoping to accomplish tonight is to go through and see, again, we have a couple meetings, obviously, before town meeting, before the end of March. So I wanted to just go through some of the non-budgetary items specifically and see who the board still would like to have come in, so we can make sure we take care of everything, hopefully even before advisory comes in. So let me just flip through. Does anyone, and you know what, I take that back about non-budgetary. Does anyone want capital to come in? I think everybody's been kind of up to date on those discussions and where they fell. We can get, I can have Jason forward the most up-to-date spreadsheet, so everybody knows exactly where we're at. The only change from what you've seen before is the 59,000 that we talked about tonight for Breakneck Hill, and the 400,000 that got put back in. And I hope I'm not leaving anything else.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, but I think the budget update that Mr. Ballantyne presented tonight, that information was in the packet, and it did have that listed in terms of the capital items.
It did.
Yes.
Oh, okay, so never mind then. We have the capital items then. Does anyone wish to have a further discussion with capital, or are we pretty much set? Okay. All right. Thank you. What's up? Summary. We did capital already. Water. Does anyone? Karen's already been in and talked about obviously the Newton Street project multiple times. Does anyone for Article 16 need Karen to come back in and have any further discussion? I see no. Okay, great.
No, but I think just, sorry, Lisa, just based on the conversation that we had with the finance team, obviously we know water rates. I know that's not related to the warrant, but we're going to have to probably take a position on FY23 water rates.
Yes.
Okay.
Soon.
So, okay. So we need to have Karen come in to discuss the water rates. I guess I'm kind of missing.
Yeah. So,
okay.
So they have a consultant, you know how they did, they have a consultant come in every couple of years. So Mark, can be honest, the consultants are kind of wrapping up their analysis of it. And my guess is before town meeting, we'll have her in to discuss the recommendations.
Yeah. Okay. I just wasn't sure if I was missing the point you were making, Chelsea. Thank you.
No, and I think just one other thing to add to what Ms. Malinowski said, and also what Mr. Stivers alluded to earlier is the new information on the MWRA rates, which seem to be significantly lower than the amount we were carrying for fiscal 23. So that may change somewhat what the consultant is looking at too. So want to make sure they've got the best information.
Okay. Vacation time, that's. Sorry, I'm just flipping through real quick. CPC. Again, we know that there's one smaller article. Is that something we want? You can certainly watch the CPC meetings. Okay.
At some point, there'll be a CPC meeting and I'll actually get to go to it. And then maybe I can just report back.
Okay.
There hasn't been one since I got appointed as our liaison or representative, whatever I am. So I think hopefully that can probably accomplish hearing from CPC.
Perfect. Article 25, it's some changes that Mr. Hagerty is making to the code. Don't know if anyone wants to hear specifically from him. I see nothing. That's great. Okay. Obviously, tree bylaw will get some guidance on that next Monday when we meet with the planning board. So they're going to touch base on that. We'll have a general idea of that. Also, I don't believe we need to have trails come in again. We're all good there. All right, select board, that's us. The capital committee, they've already talked to us about that. I can't imagine we want to bring them back in again for that. Regional schools committee stabilization, Greg talked to us about that. Does anyone want him to come back in for further discussion on that?
Madam Chair, I think you skipped right over the article that select board member Dennington had been working on. I didn't know if he wanted to.
See, Andrew, it was so good. I just moved past it.
He wasn't saying anything. I thought.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
For speaking up on my little pet issue.
Nope. What article is that? What number, Andrew?
Article 28. I don't know if Jim Haggerty is still here. Nope, but I should bring this to his attention as well.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. It's a proposed bylaw which would prevent surprise rules and regulations from this board or any other board in town, so that for any board which has the authority to issue rules and regulations, you need to hold a hearing on them and publish the proposed regulations at the town clerk's office 14 days before the hearing. It's a really simple Article J drafted it and I tweaked it a little bit. One thing to consider is the board that would most affect, as I realize this, is us, because there are some rules and regulations we promulgate, like the transfer station rules and things like that. And this would mean that the proposed rules would need to be posted, need to put them, on the web 14 days before the hearing, rather than just in the packet for a hearing. Okay, so that's a little thing we can adapt to, but otherwise I think it's pretty straightforward. So if anyone has any questions about it, I'm happy
So
to.
Andrew,
Yeah,
I do have one. So it's geared towards rules and regs and not necessarily policy.
that's correct. So one of the things that Jay and I talked about was, you're right, we're talking about, if you go through the town code, you search for rules and regulations, you can find some boards and committees that have authority to issue rules and regulations, like the Historical Commission, demolition delay bylaw, planning board, subdivision rules and regulations, et cetera, et cetera.
Board of Health,
Board of Health.
Personnel board it can promulgate the rules and regs as well.
Yes, okay. We're not talking about things like, boards that have policies like you must submit something X number of days before the hearing before it can be considered. That's not what we're aiming at.
Okay. Any questions for Andrew on this? Chelsea?
Do we have a list of things that would fall under this?
Yeah, I have started to do that. I haven't, I can get that for you if you like, or I can put that
It just
together.
strikes, when you said transfer station rules and regs, it just struck me as we have to give 2 weeks, like we do that every year, right? So
Yeah.
this would, you have to post it 2 weeks in advance?
Here's the dilemma, right? Is it's easier to have one standard that would just apply to everyone rather, I mean, what this is really geared towards is like situations that happen with the historical commission, the demolition delay bylaw, so that there's going forward, there's a better process for if the historical commission wanted to issue rules and regulations as it has the authority to do about the demolition delay bylaw, there's a process for it. So we could then draft like a different set of rules that apply rather than just keep it this way. I think it's one simple rule process that every board would follow. And one thing I can do is I could just circulate this to the different boards that do have rulemaking authority and just get their input before the next meeting. Do you see any issue or concern with this?
Okay.
That would include the planning board, Board of Health, historical commission.
Mr. Haley.
Yeah, and Chelsea, I hear you in terms of, you know, there are some things that are almost pro forma, but you know what? They're pro forma for us, but it's not a bad idea for the 14 days notice, I don't think. And if it's a little bit of an annoyance for Mr. Purple, we can live with that.
All right.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. So Article 31 is a Board of Selectmen item, but we haven't really discussed this in any way. Marty, I know that you're the Shopsy rep, and I know you're on CPC. It has to do with votes of town meeting in transferring money to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I think this discussion I want to put on for one of our meetings in March, preferably potentially the first. I think there's a lot of different sides to this, and I don't know that the board has all the information on it as well. So as we're it impacts CPC, and I've yet to be at a CPC meeting, so hopefully
I don't know what their position is. You know, I can see the side that would say, well, that it does create some cumbersomeness for Shopsy, and maybe they're not as facile as they'd like to be in terms of purchasing. But I can see the other side of it, that we don't want money just sitting there, that there's not almost the way we're talking about the regs, there's not a review by other interested parties on whether or not it makes sense to spend that money. So, but I don't know what CPC's position is because we haven't had a meeting yet.
Right. And well, so, you know, Marty, maybe when I assume they're going to have a meeting soon with town meeting coming up, maybe you could broach this subject. Honestly, I view this as a placeholder right now until we actually sit down and really discuss it. Obviously there's a lot of things to consider. CPC's position is one as well. And I would just be interested to hear their thoughts on it. And Mark, I believe council had provided some guidance on this. Maybe that's something we could also make sure that the full board has.
Yeah, council was the one who redid the article that you have in the draft warrant here.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm happy to provide any correspondence that the
Thank you.
council-
Just think it would be good. That's all. So we'll put that one off technically for now. We know they're going to come in. Article 32, certainly we kind of make Mr. Weisham come in if we want to. And then we'll just finish up with the easements, the noise bylaw. Obviously, the noise bylaw committee is planning on coming in on the 1st and presenting. Is that correct, Mark? Presenting their final draft. They're in conversations with council right now. He's reviewing where they're at. So hopefully we'll have something more standard for that. The feasibility for NERI, we probably aren't going to know anything on that. Potentially first week, maybe even into the second week in March, I'm guesstimating. So, and the scenic roads bylaw, we're going to touch on that briefly with planning board. I think they have it on their agenda to discuss on Monday as well.
And Lisa, on
Yes.
that, point, so I've started to review that, and I think that, I mean, what I intend to say at that meeting is, I think it's something that maybe would be perfect for a special town meeting, right? I know we've talked about the idea of formalizing fall town meetings where that focus on the, okay, zoning land use, because that buys more time. Like we've learned through this process that sometimes it takes a little bit of time. And so I would be interested in working with the planning board, using that additional time to try to work through some of that language. I mean, I have some real concerns about some of the stuff in the current bylaw, but rather than just say no, I think it's makes sense to try to shoot for the fall, but that's obviously up to the planning board because they're the sponsor of the article.
Okay. I think it'll be a good discussion on Monday. I know they're not anticipating it being anything like the marathon meetings that we seem to have lately. But, you know, again, I think it's good that we have an idea, and it presented a great opportunity to kind of take care of a few things at the same time. So any other comments, or put it this way, budget wise, is there anyone else that the board wants to come in at this point and discuss fiscal year 23?
I still think that departments that have a revolving account and seeing if there's options to move expenses into those.
Yeah. Any other than those? Nope. Okay. Then we will schedule them to come in as well. Mr. Healy, draft charge for the 3,000, listen to me. Oh my gosh. 300th committee. 3,000 would be something, but 300th committee. Would you like to speak to what's in our packet? Was it you or Miss Hale that put this together, or both?
Well, like everything else, you know, she did all the work. And, you know, I did the organization of it. I'm just I'm pulling it up on my other screen here. I mean, I think it's kind of obvious from the way, and from what is attached. Basically what I did is I looked at, I attached a number of them, but I probably looked at 25 or 30 different, 250, 300, 375th, et cetera, town committees. And this is kind of a hybrid of what they did, and threw in some the bracketed comments are mine in terms of options. I mean, I think the two main things really are the composition and the money aspect of it. And, you know, what do we think about from that perspective? I mean, it is pretty clear that the towns that had significant celebrations, and by that I mean, you know, some had galas, some had sort of a Heritage Day on steroids, you know, in terms of the way they celebrated. That cost money. A lot of them, most of them, quite frankly, that were doing 250 or 300 or 375, it was a year-long enterprise. And not a lot of those things that they did during the course of the year, they had, you know, whether it was subcommittees or just enlisting, you know, letting the arts community know that you get April or something like that, or you know, is there some sort of function you can do for that? And you know, from a recreation standpoint, whether it's a tournament that's you know, sort of located in the town, there are all sorts of things. But that's what the committee does. They come up with those sort of ideas. So that almost everybody has a whole series of events during the course of the year. The big difference is some towns really focus on fundraising, and it's, you know, there are some contributions that I saw reference to from, you know, sort of town meeting, town revenue funded, but those seem pretty, even if it happens, that almost seems like seed money. as opposed to serious money. That if you're going to go a serious route for, a big celebration, whether it's fireworks again, or a gala or something like that, or to bring in, a significant, speaker or all sorts of things like that, that's money. And, I think we can all come up with folks off the top of our head who we think would probably be pretty good fundraising people, but that's really what you have to consider, whether or not you want to go that route. I think it's a good idea to go that route, but it's a lot of work. So anyway, those are some of the decisions that are sort of lodged in there. And then in terms of the makeup of the committee, whether it's completely ad hoc, which I have sort of leaned towards favoring, or if you want to, ding folks from various committees. I'm somewhat agnostic about it, but if I were making the decision, it would be, sort of free flow. And, we don't designate that folks have to have been on a particular committee, or certain committees have a representative or anything like that. But, that's obviously subject to discussion as well. So those are my thoughts.
All right, Mr. Dennington, your thoughts?
Marty, I like your idea of the really ad hoc. There's a lot to, like, this is not some, are we going to be voting on this tonight, or there's still a lot of blanks to fill in and flesh out, and there's still like 5 years to think about this, although
I will tell you 5 is at the outside, but nobody is sooner than 3 years.
No, I meant that kind of tongue in cheek, but
yeah, okay.
It's strange because, like, the length of the term is, are we really appointing people for I guess we just appoint them until the tricentennial occurs, right? Did you look at or consider what Hopkinton did recently, or get any ideas about what they did? Because they had
I can't remember if I looked at how one of the things is, even if a lot of towns had big celebrations, but they didn't have stuff, at least that I could find, on their websites. And I'm pretty sure I looked at Hopkinton, but there wasn't anything that was no charge for a committee or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have any thought about the number of members? I see you've got a bunch of different options, but
honestly, there were a couple of towns that basically said there's no limit. And on the one hand, that's attractive, but on the other hand, is it really a committee if somebody's able to just, say, I want to be part of the committee and show up occasionally? I think you want more of a commitment than that. And as a result, I think you want a number. That being said, particularly if we're going to, be ambitious about the sort of celebration that we want in 2027, then I think you don't want 8 people, you want 15 people.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Thank you, Andrew. And this was just a starting point. That was the goal of tonight, is to just, kind of figure out where Marty's thinking of maybe going as he's spearheading this, and then for another meeting for us all to kind of come back with, based on what he's provided us, kind of where we're at as well. So
can we nominate Marty to be on the committee?
If I'm back in the country by then.
Oh, Andrew, that's good.
Is that a lifetime appointment?
Awesome. All right, Andrew, anything else?
No.
All right, thank you. Ms. Malinowski.
Thank you. Thanks, Marty, for putting this together, and Vanessa. I think I'm leaning towards it not being designated spots by boards and committees. I think, I'd like to encourage people who are interested, but I think we've had a lot of good luck with advertising and getting some new folks in lately who are kind of hitting the ground running, which I think is great. So obviously, if there's, a resident who serves on a current board and committee and are interested, then that's great, obviously. But I'm not wed to having specific positions, although I think a good breadth of different backgrounds is important here too, making sure that we have, someone who would represent the senior population, the youth sport population, and making sure that we have a good balanced group. That's probably what I'd be looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers.
Thanks. I agree with Chelsea and Marty that less designation here gives us more flexibility to find people who are really interested in it, which I think is an important aspect. And larger number of people, I think, gives you a broader base to work with. I guess I'm not in favor of a high budget, big deal kind of thing. I think I find that pretty hard to justify, but I think there's a real opportunity to have a year-long celebration from a variety of supporters, if you will. And I think one of the things that strikes me as a real opportunity is getting the schools involved. I think this could be a great project for the schools during the course of the year to have students involved, and that brings families into the exercise as well. And it seems to me that the real challenge here is to take advantage of the opportunity for what I think of as community building, as opposed to having big external resources applied here. Can we find local events that can bring people together in a different combination of ways over the course of years to celebrate this event? So that, to me, would be an important focus for the process. I think Marty and Vanessa have some good ideas from the other communities here, but again, I would look pretty strongly toward this committee to begin to flesh this out and come back with suggestions along the lines of whatever direction we want to send them. Again, my personal view is lower budget, local focus kind of thing, but I'm one voice of 5 here. So, but great start. And I think it's a huge opportunity to really pull the town together around this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. So I also agree with the makeup of the committee. I think just leaving it broad. I mean, I think we have incredible talent on the boards and committees we have now. And if somebody wants to take the initiative to get on this committee, they certainly have the opportunity to do that. Sam, this is the last time I'll disagree with you, okay? We'll be great friends after this. But
Okay.
I'm looking more for a real celebration. I mean, 300 doesn't come around. I certainly won't be here for 400. God willing, I'll be here for 300. So, I kind of like the fireworks. I'll be honest with you. Again, I wouldn't want to pigeonhole this committee in what they want to do. I would be really interested in what they think the appropriate thing is. But I'll tell you, Sam, I do like the involving the schools. I think that's a great suggestion, and it's certainly something I would be looking forward to. I think there's a lot of things to celebrate in Southborough. And Marty, I like using the year to be able to do that, to celebrate some of the great things that are taking place and have taken place as well. So again, I think this is a great start. I thank you, Vanessa, and you, Marty, for spearheading this. We'll certainly have it on another agenda, I'm sure. Maybe not March 1st, but probably the second meeting in March. Yes, Marty.
With this as a sort of jumping off point, would it make sense to send this or an abridged version of the draft charge to the senior community, to the rec folks, and as well as posting it through the town website and other sources, and get input on what people think even before we form a committee?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Everybody good with that? Sam, look, we agree. Look at that. We're starting it.
I'll buy a firecracker for the celebrations.
All right, good enough. We are good. All right, Marty. Thank you again, Vanessa. So we'll get this out there and we'll solicit feedback, and I think that's a great suggestion. So thank you for that. Continued discussion regarding Miramax Films. Ms. Hale, you have an update for us.
Yeah, so a quick update for the board here. Mark and I did meet with our public safety team and Mr. Cadron recently. And the group has agreed or would like to recommend that the Pocket Park area actually would be a really good location for the production company to place the 2 big tractor trailers they're referring to. in their last report. Karen agrees that is a fine place for this and that it would not interfere with the construction schedule or anything going on in the park area. The area certainly would be covered by, traffic details and security by Miramax for any time that it would be there. And these trailers would be mostly for equipment and props. So they're looking for somewhere as close to campus as possible because they'll be going back and forth to those tractor trailers during the day. I think that covers all the conversations we had with Miramax, unless the board has any questions.
Just one question, and then we'll go around, Andrew. I see you have a question. What is the time frame again, if you could refresh my memory?
It would be March 13th would be when they would come and set up, start setting up. And then I think they would be wrapping up by March 25th to 27th.
Okay. Mr. Dennington.
Yeah, I have some, just because I'm now very focused on that space. I was going back and looking at them when we were looking at the minutes from the last meeting. I was remembering, the real concern I had about the tractor trailers was the generators, right? But the generators are going to be on St. Mark's. So this is really just like, they're just tractor trailers and people and equipment and stuff. And, I even would just prefer to have them on the street part of St. Mark's Street rather than that space. It's just a very sensitive area under, discussion right now. I think that that's my preference.
The area, just to clarify, the area where they're going to be is the area where St. Mark's currently uses as the parking area.
Okay.
So it's not in the area that you and your committee are working on.
Okay.
It's strictly on the
edge
property.
I'm focused on the south part. Okay.
It's down right. It's down the other end.
And then that actually makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Chelsea, anything? Marty?
No, agree. It makes sense.
Sam?
No issues.
Lisa? No issues.
Hey,
All
Lisa,
right, great.
I do have a question. Are we going to have
Sure.
to vote on a permit for this at some point? Because I remain interested in making sure that we've got whatever conditions are appropriate in terms of noise control and hours of operation and those kind of things for the neighbors.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I have jumped the gun. I don't think there's going to be anything. This is something that is entirely on St. Mark's property at this point. I've had a brief conversation with Rob Guklevich, the business manager over at St. Mark's, and he's assuring me that that they're going to try to maintain respect at all times for abutters and for neighbors. One of the things Ms. Hale didn't get into is they did talk a little bit about a schedule. The chiefs did talk about noise in the conversation, and they seems to be that the hours of filming are going to be very respectful. So they're not going to be going really late on some of these things. They're going to be putting up sound barriers around the generators and things like that for when they'll be needed. So hopefully we're not going to have any issues. It looks like they're trying to take every precaution to make sure it's kind of a they're insulating, I think, the neighborhoods and everything in that from any sound.
If we only had a noise bylaw, it would be perfect.
Well, there may be some permits,
Yeah,
Sam.
they're not going to be using leaf blowers, Sam. I know that.
Yeah, I think from the Board of Health side, Chelsea, there might be permits
Yes.
involved.
They do need to get a food permit. Yep. So
and they
I
did
asked
file
Betsy.
that paperwork this week
Okay.
for food permits.
Thank you. Maybe we could notify the neighborhood though, with a mailer or something, just so, because I know that when something's going on at St. Mark's, I get calls and I can also hear it. So
Me too.
Mr. Cadron did speak to that actually and said they physically would be going door to door to the neighborhoods over there to give out, a flyer with some information. And we confirmed that he should go and register with the police department before he does that.
Okay, thank you.
That was my memory that I remembered him saying that as well.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Purple, you had one question?
I did have one question. I just wanted to get a clarification from the board on the charge that you approved earlier for the building committee. On the second page, there was something that said, open for discussion as the number of voting members as you, whether you wanted to have 7 or 9, that would mean 2 or 4 residents at large. So before I put this together and finalized it and advertised it, I wanted to just get a sense from the board. Do you want to start with 7, a 7-member committee, and then determine whether you want to expand it to 9? But I wanted to get a sense while we were all still here.
I'll give you my preference and we'll go around. I would start with 9. And if you have to go down to 7, go down to 7. I think where it's a school looking to be built, the more public input would be great. So that's my 2 cents. Andrew?
Okay, well, just a question off of that then. So how strictly are you going to enforce? I know it's just, there's a preference for people with architecture, engineering, or construction experience. I envision you can get a lot of people who would be interested in being on a, parents who would be interested in participating in this committee, but that might not have. See, to me, that's the difference between the 7 or the 9, right? If it's 9, I think it's hard to get 4 people that have that type of. If it's 7, it's easy. So I guess if my idea of the 9 would be you have at least 2 that have that experience and then 2 that are just people who are very interested, civic-minded people with kind of common sense who can add a lot of value, but haven't worked on something like the public safety building committee before or something like that.
I think you can simply add the word preferred at the end of experience, and that way people understand kind of what you're looking for, but it gives you latitude, I think, to put people on there who have a real passion for doing this but may not have the exact experience you're looking for.
And Andrew too, I know when Sam and I were both on the golf course master plan committee, that was a pretty large group, but that was actually a really great group to serve with. And it was, I think, Sam, was there 2 or 4 citizens at large on that?
I probably 4, quite a crowd.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. There was like 15 of us. It was a relatively large group. So, Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the 9 gives us flexibility to mix and match a little bit, as long as we're not constrained for all architects or builders or whatever. And I think broader participation is a good signal to send to the community. So I vote for 9.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Healy.
Yeah, with 9, you're going to need a good chair, but looking at what the likely makeup of the committee is, I think you'll find one. 9 can be unwieldy, but if the committee is run properly, I agree with the 4 residents as opposed to just 2.
So does that mean you're throwing your hat in the ring for the one of the at-large positions?
I am not. Again, please let me get on a plane.
I'm just joking. All right, Ms. Malinowski, I think she stepped away for a second. Oh, there you go. Chelsea, we're talking 7 or 9.
Yep. I don't have an opinion. I'm not participating.
Okay, she's not participating. Sorry. Okay, so there we go.
Right,
Does that answer your question?
I've got my marching orders. I will change it to 9 and make the adjustments as needed. I just want to make sure when I file the charge with the clerk's office that it's as correct as we want it to be. So, okay. Thank you.
Item E, we already discussed for the ARPA committee. That's done. Let's go to our last and final public comment. Thank you for Tim, whoever Tim may be. Welcome. Come over. If you could just say your name for the record.
Sure. Tim Fling.
Hey, Tim, how are you? Welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm doing well. Thanks for the marathon meeting, guys, and sorry to make you stay later, but I got a couple things that I was going to bring up. You guys talked earlier about the need to maybe keep the YouTube type streaming available for committees and boards. It's been extremely helpful for us on the noise bylaw committee to go back and do the minutes and all that, especially since we don't have a secretary on the committee. So I would heavily encourage whatever we need to do to keep that going. It's also nice to be able to go back and see it and check up on some of the things that are going on that I don't have time in my schedule to watch. In terms of the ARPA, I think it's a great idea to use some of that money to offset taxes. I was a big fan of Mr. Healy's capital expense idea, in which some of the capital expenses could be offset by that. I felt that that was a really smart way of approaching taking care of taxes in that manner. I also would like to bring up the idea that there could be trash cans on maybe some of our public sidewalks that are severely lacking within town. There's a lot of trash that gets dumped, and I feel like if we use some of that money towards trash cans and their upkeep, that could be really great for the town, as well as maybe a dog park. We currently don't have anything of that nature within the town, and the ones that are nearby are further away. And then the last thing that I'd like to just bring up is that COVID has severely impacted urban sprawl. And I haven't really seen a ton of updates or surveys in terms of what families would be moving out into the suburbs again. I know in the area that I'm in, and I've only been in town for about 3 years, there are a number of young families that have all moved local. And I'm sure that that will affect the school system. So with that in mind, as these updates are going for the schools and buildings that would be eliminated and whatnot, or reused, I would just encourage that we look at any current data, like within the last year, on what urban sprawl is happening and how that is affecting the school system and families moving to the suburbs before we would make any actual decisions about building reallocation.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for paying attention, clearly. That's good. We appreciate it, Tim. We also appreciate you obviously serving on the Noise Bylaw Committee as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? I see none. All right. We are going to skip adjournment because we are going into executive session. So do I have a motion to enter into executive session for MGL Chapter 38, Section 21, and not returning to open session to discuss contract negotiations for the fire chief, exemption 2, to discuss contract negotiations for the superintendent of public works, exemption 2, and to review and approve executive session minutes from the January 18th, 2022 meeting, exemption 7, as the chair has determined that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the town's position.
So move.
Thank you. Roll call. Mr. Dennington.
Aye.
Mr. Healy.
Aye.
Mr. Stivers.
Aye.
Ms. Melanowski.
Aye.
Ms. Braccio, aye. If we could lock the room and enter into executive